She believed the plan was set: deceive her elderly husband and claim his fortune. But when the will was read, something unexpected happened that made her panic. Victoria Hayes stood at the edge of the grand ballroom, a flute of champagne delicately balanced between her manicured fingers. The crystal chandelier above cast prismatic patterns across her emerald dress, a dress she had saved 3 months' tips to afford. To the untrained eye, she looked like she belonged among Manhattan's elite. No one would guess that 12 hours earlier, she had been serving cocktails at an upscale bar downtown, or that she shared a cramped apartment in Queens with 2 other waitresses. "You've perfected that look," her friend Melissa whispered, sidling up beside her. "That perfect blend of interest and disinterest." Victoria's lips curved into a practiced smile. "It's all about balance. Look too eager, and they run. Look too aloof, and they never approach." At 32, Victoria had spent half her life studying the wealthy, not from textbooks but from the other side of serving trays and bar counters. She had memorized their mannerisms, their linguistic patterns, the subtle ways they signaled their status. Born to a single mother in a Rust Belt town in Pennsylvania, Victoria had known from an early age that mediocrity was a prison. Her mother had worked double shifts at a diner until arthritis gnarled her hands, leaving her with nothing but social security checks and regrets. "I won't end up like that," Victoria had promised herself at 16, watching her mother fall asleep on the couch, still wearing her waitress uniform. By 18, she had moved to New York with $437 and a conviction that beauty and intelligence were currencies that, properly invested, would yield the returns she desired. Now scanning the room with calculating eyes, Victoria assessed each potential target. Most of the wealthy men were either too young, with youthful wives to match, too flamboyantly arrogant, or too surrounded by sycophants. She needed someone established, but not inaccessible. Someone with substance, not just flash. That's when she noticed him. Sebastian Freeman stood slightly apart from the crowd, observing rather than performing. At 57, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had nothing to prove. His tailored Tom Ford suit hung perfectly on his frame, but it was the watch on his wrist, a vintage Patek Philippe that Victoria recognized as easily costing more than her annual income, that confirmed her suspicions. This was old money, or at least money that had been around long enough to mature like fine wine. "Who is he?" Victoria murmured to Melissa, who worked as an events coordinator and had wrangled their invitations to this charity gala. "Sebastian Freeman. Made his fortune in tech and smart real estate investments before either was trendy. Widowed about 2 years ago. His wife had cancer." Victoria nodded, filing away the information. "Is he seeing anyone?" Melissa gave her a knowing look. "Not seriously. There's been rumors, but nothing concrete. Word is he's very private since his wife died." "But Vic," she hesitated, "he's not just rich. He's respected. Smart. The real deal." Victoria's smile deepened. Perfect. She waited, positioning herself near the bar where Sebastian would eventually need to pass. When he approached, she deliberately looked away, focusing on the abstract painting on the wall as if it had captured her complete attention. "It's a bit ostentatious, isn't it?" His voice came, rich and measured. Victoria turned, feigning surprise at being addressed. "I was just thinking it's trying too hard, like it's shouting to be noticed." Sebastian's eyebrows raised slightly, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Most people at these events just nod and claim to see depth and complexity. "Well, I'm not most people," Victoria replied, turning fully toward him now. "Besides, there's enough artificial complexity in this room without adding mediocre art to the mix." He laughed, a genuine sound that made the fine lines around his eyes crinkle. Victoria noticed the silver at his temples, the slight weathering of his hands, distinguished signs of age that only enhanced his appeal. "Sebastian Freeman," he said, extending his hand. "Victoria Hayes," she replied, her grip firm but feminine. Their conversation flowed with surprising ease. Victoria had prepared extensively for this type of interaction, but she found herself using less of her rehearsed material than expected. Sebastian asked questions that required actual thought, not just flirtatious banter. When she mentioned having read an obscure novel he admired, his eyes lit up with genuine interest. "You know," he said, after nearly an hour of conversation, "I had nearly decided to skip this event. I'm glad I didn't." Victoria smiled, noting the slight flush on his cheeks. Not from overindulgence. He'd had only one scotch, nursed slowly, but from engagement, from connection, or at least the illusion of it. "How is your health these days?" she asked, voice laced with casual concern. "My friend mentioned you'd been dealing with some issues." Sebastian's expression flickered briefly with surprise before settling into appreciation for her directness. "Nothing serious. Blood pressure, cholesterol, the usual suspects at my age. My doctor's more concerned than I am." Victoria nodded sympathetically. "Doctors always are. My grandfather used to say they'd declare water dangerous if they could prescribe something instead." This drew another laugh from Sebastian. "Your grandfather sounds like a wise man." "He was," Victoria said, drawing on the real emotion of her grandfather's memory, the only genuinely positive male influence in her early life. "He taught me to see through pretenses." As the evening progressed, Victoria maintained the perfect balance. Intelligent but not intimidating, attentive but not desperate, revealing enough personal information to seem open while keeping her true circumstances vague. When Sebastian mentioned an exhibit at the Met he wanted to see, she expressed interest without suggesting they attend together. The invitation had to come from him. "Perhaps you'd like to join me?" he asked, right on cue. "Sunday afternoon if you're free." Victoria pretended to consider her schedule. "I believe I am." They exchanged numbers and Victoria felt a surge of satisfaction as she entered his contact information into her phone. Phase 1, complete. Later that night in her modest apartment, Victoria kicked off her painful heels and opened her laptop. She spent the next 3 hours researching everything publicly available about Sebastian Freeman. His company, Freeman Innovations, had pioneered data security systems before expanding into sustainable tech infrastructure. Estimated net worth, $740 million according to Forbes. His wife, Catherine, had been an accomplished pianist before her death from ovarian cancer. They had no children. Most importantly, Sebastian had recently stepped back from daily operations at his company, remaining as chairman but delegating much of the work to his executive team. Perfect timing. Victoria created a spreadsheet, methodically planning her strategy. She would need to appear cultured but not pretentious, kind but not saccharine, independent but appreciative of traditional gestures. Sebastian wasn't looking for a trophy or arm candy. He had the confidence of a man who valued substance. She would give him the illusion of exactly that. "You're different from the women I usually meet," Sebastian told her on their third date, a private dinner at an exclusive restaurant where the chef prepared their meal tableside. Victoria looked down modestly. "I'm just me. No pretenses." The irony wasn't lost on her, but then again, wasn't every relationship built on some level of performance? She was simply more strategic about her role. Over the following weeks, Victoria carefully orchestrated their relationship's progression. She declined expensive gifts at first, accepting only books or small meaningful items. She listened attentively to his stories about building his company, asked intelligent questions, and shared enough real details about her life. Her love of classical music, true. Her work as a consultant, vague enough to cover her actual bartending job. Her strained relationship with her mother, painfully true. To create an authentic connection. When Sebastian showed signs of genuine attachment, mentioning future plans together or introducing her to close friends, Victoria knew her plan was working. Yet sometimes, in quiet moments when he looked at her with such sincere affection, she felt an unexpected twinge. Not guilt exactly, she had learned long ago that sentiment was a luxury she couldn't afford, but perhaps recognition of what a different life might have been. "You make me feel young again," Sebastian told her one evening as they stood on the balcony of his penthouse overlooking Central Park, the city lights shimmering below them. Not just desired, but understood. Victoria leaned into him, resting her head against his chest. "You make me feel safe," she replied, selecting the words carefully for maximum impact. She felt his heart quicken at this vulnerability. Men like Sebastian, powerful, controlled, responsible, craved the opportunity to protect, to provide sanctuary. It was their most exploitable weakness. When he first showed signs of fatigue, occasionally cancelling plans due to meetings running long or falling asleep during evening conversations, Victoria expressed just the right amount of concern. "You're pushing yourself too hard," she said, massaging his shoulders as he sat at his desk reviewing documents. "Your company needs you healthy." "The doctors say it's just stress and age," Sebastian replied, tilting his head back to look at her. "Nothing serious." Victoria nodded, filing away this information. Still, maybe we should focus on wellness. More home-cooked meals, regular sleep schedules. She kissed his forehead. I want you around for a long time. If Sebastian noticed how her eyes calculated even as she expressed concern, he gave no indication. And why would he? Men like him were accustomed to being wanted for their resources. The difference was, Victoria made him feel wanted for himself. 5 months into their relationship, as Sebastian's health showed subtle but consistent signs of decline, more fatigue, occasional shortness of breath, a concerning dizzy spell, Victoria began laying groundwork for the next phase. I worry about you, she told him over dinner in his penthouse. You've built this amazing life, this legacy, but who's looking out for you? Sebastian reached across the table, taking her hand. I have you. Victoria smiled, letting a calculated hint of emotion show in her eyes. Yes, you do. Always. 2 weeks later, Sebastian proposed. The ring was an emerald-cut diamond flanked by smaller emeralds, a nod to the dress she had worn when they first met. Victoria accepted with tears in her eyes, tears that were partly genuine. She had done it. The poor girl from Pennsylvania was about to marry into one of New York's most substantial fortunes. What Victoria didn't see was the momentary flicker in Sebastian's eyes as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Not doubt about his feelings, but a shrewd assessment that mirrored her own. Behind his warm smile lay the mind that had built an empire, a mind that had spent decades recognizing patterns and calculating odds. Victoria had studied the wealthy for years, but Sebastian had spent even longer studying people who wanted something from him. The game had only just begun. The engagement announcement appeared in the New York Times on a Sunday morning, accompanied by a professionally captured photograph of Victoria and Sebastian at the Freeman Foundation's annual gala. Victoria's smile radiated genuine happiness, not for the man whose arm she held, but for the future she had secured. Within hours, her phone exploded with congratulatory messages from people who had barely acknowledged her existence before. You're practically American royalty now, gushed Melissa over brunch the following week. I still can't believe my little cocktail waitress is marrying Sebastian Freeman. Victoria sipped her mimosa, her engagement ring catching the light. It's surreal sometimes. What was truly surreal was how quickly the world transformed around her. Designers who once would have ignored her now sent personal invitations to private showings. Restaurants that required months-long waiting lists miraculously found tables available. The Victoria, who had meticulously counted her tips each night, now had a black Amex card with no spending limit. We need to discuss the prenuptial agreement, Sebastian's attorney, Robert Keller, informed them during a meeting in Sebastian's home office. A Harvard-educated lawyer with perpetually furrowed brows, Keller had been with Sebastian since the early days of Freeman Innovations. Is that really necessary? Victoria asked, her voice a perfect blend of hurt and understanding. I'm not marrying Sebastian for his money. Sebastian squeezed her hand. It's standard practice, darling. Nothing personal. Of course, Victoria conceded gracefully. Inside, she had anticipated this hurdle. Their prenup was inevitable, but what mattered were the terms. As it turned out, the terms were generous but strategic. In the event of divorce, Victoria would receive the penthouse apartment in Manhattan, valued at $14 million, a lump sum of $5 million, and annual alimony of $250,000 for 10 years. In the event of Sebastian's death while they were still married, she would receive substantially more, 30% of his personal assets, excluding company shares which would be held in trust, with Victoria receiving the dividends. It's quite reasonable, said Elena Santos, the attorney Victoria had hired on Melissa's recommendation. More generous than most prenups I've seen. Victoria nodded thoughtfully. The death clause was the important part. 30% of Sebastian's fortune would set her up for life, especially since his personal assets included investment portfolios, real estate holdings, art collections, and substantial cash reserves estimated at nearly $300 million. The wedding was an elegant affair at the Freeman estate in the Hamptons. Only 150 guests attended, a small number by elite standards, but Sebastian had insisted on an intimate ceremony. Victoria walked down the aisle in a custom Vera Wang gown, past rows of New York's most influential figures. Her mother sat in the front row, looking uncomfortable in her new designer outfit, a stark reminder of the world Victoria had left behind. You look beautiful, Sebastian whispered as she reached him. "So do you," she replied, genuinely appreciative of his distinguished appearance in his tailored tuxedo. As they exchanged vows, Victoria felt an unexpected emotion. Not love. She had conditioned herself against such vulnerability, but perhaps respect. Sebastian was everything she had targeted: wealthy, intelligent, respected. In another life, under different circumstances, perhaps she could have truly loved him. But that wasn't the life she had chosen. The honeymoon was a month-long tour of Europe's most exclusive destinations, a private villa on Italy's Amalfi coast, a chateau in France's Loire Valley, a yacht cruise through the Greek islands. Victoria documented each location with carefully curated social media posts, building her new identity as Mrs. Freeman. "You're a natural at this," Sebastian observed one evening as she charmed Italian aristocrats at a private dinner in Rome. "You were born for this world." Victoria smiled, leaning in to kiss his cheek. "I was born for you." The irony was that Victoria did excel in Sebastian's world. Her years of observation had prepared her well. She knew how to navigate the subtle power dynamics of elite social circles, when to speak and when to listen, how to form alliances without seeming calculated. The wives of Sebastian's business associates, initially suspicious of the younger woman who had captured the eligible widower, gradually accepted her as she demonstrated intelligence, discretion, and social grace. Upon their return to New York, Victoria threw herself into her role as Sebastian's wife. She redecorated the penthouse, replacing the minimalist modern aesthetic with warmer, more luxurious designs. She organized dinner parties that combined Sebastian's business connections with cultural figures, creating evenings that were both productive and enjoyable. She represented him at charity events when his health prevented attendance, always ensuring that the Freeman name maintained its prestigious standing. "You've transformed this place," Sebastian said, observing the changes to their home. Catherine was never much interested in entertaining. Victoria had learned that mentioning Catherine was Sebastian's way of testing her. "She had different strengths," Victoria replied diplomatically, "but I'm glad I can do this for you." Sebastian's business empire was more extensive than Victoria had initially realized. Beyond Freeman Innovations, his primary technology company valued at over $2 billion, he maintained controlling interests in real estate developments across 3 continents, a venture capital firm that had backed some of Silicon Valley's most successful startups, and significant stakes in everything from sustainable energy to boutique hotels. Mr. Freeman's portfolio is diversified across 17 major sectors, explained David Chen, Sebastian's chief financial advisor, during a private financial briefing Sebastian had arranged for Victoria. "The structure ensures stability, regardless of market fluctuations." Victoria absorbed every detail, asking intelligent questions that impressed both David and Sebastian. Understanding her husband's wealth was crucial to her plan. "You have a mind for business," Sebastian observed afterward. "You should consider joining the foundation board." Catherine always found it overwhelming. Another comparison to his late wife. Victoria nodded thoughtfully. "I'd be honored." The Freeman Foundation, with its $300 million endowment, supported education initiatives and medical research, particularly focused on cancer treatments. Victoria recognized the opportunity. A board position would give her deeper insight into Sebastian's finances, while building her public image as a philanthropist rather than simply a trophy wife. 6 months into their marriage, Victoria had established herself as Sebastian's perfect partner, earning admiration from his social circle and loyalty from their household staff. Sebastian seemed genuinely happy, his health stabilized by Victoria's insistence on healthy meals, regular doctor appointments, and stress management. This presented a problem. Victoria had counted on Sebastian's health continuing to decline naturally. At 58, he remained frustratingly vigorous, despite occasional fatigue and the blood pressure issues his doctor monitored. Their life had fallen into a comfortable routine, too comfortable for Victoria's long-term plans. One evening, as she watched Sebastian swim laps in their private pool, his stroke strong and rhythmic, the first seeds of impatience took root. How many years would she need to wait? 10? 20? The prenup protected her, only if she remained married to him when he died. Divorce would yield a fraction of what she stood to gain as his widow. "You're pushing yourself too hard," she called out, forcing concern into her voice as Sebastian completed his 15th lap. He paused, treading water. Exercise keeps me young, my dear. Dr. Patel says it's the best thing for my heart. Dr. Amit Patel had been Sebastian's physician for over a decade. A concierge doctor to many of Manhattan's elite, he had a direct, no-nonsense approach that Sebastian appreciated. Victoria, however, found him frustratingly thorough and unwilling to indulge her concerns about Sebastian's health. Still, you should rest more, Victoria insisted. You seemed short of breath yesterday after the stairs. Sebastian pulled himself out of the pool, water cascading off his still fit body. Did I? I don't recall that. Victoria's strategy shifted after that conversation. She began subtly tracking Sebastian's health, noting any slight irregularity, a cough that lingered, momentary dizziness, changes in sleep patterns. She researched symptoms of age-related conditions, looking for ways to attribute ordinary occurrences to more serious concerns. During their next appointment with Dr. Patel, Victoria was prepared. Sebastian's been experiencing fatigue much more frequently, she reported, her hand protectively covering her husband's. And I've noticed his breathing seems labored, especially at night. Sebastian looked surprised. I feel fine, Amit. Dr. Patel glanced between them. Let's run some tests to be sure. But your last cardiac workup was excellent, Sebastian. Victoria nodded, displaying perfect wifely concern. Better safe than sorry. I just worry. The tests predictably came back normal, but Victoria had planted the first seed of doubt, both with the doctor and with Sebastian himself. 3 weeks later, at a charity auction for the Metropolitan Museum, Victoria met Julian Reed. Dark-haired and 34, Julian was an investment banker with Morgan Stanley who had recently returned from their London office. He approached her at the bar while Sebastian was engaged in conversation with the museum director. Mrs. Freeman, I believe. His British-inflected accent carried just the right note of respectful admiration. Julian Reed, I've been hoping to meet you. Your work with the Freeman Foundation's education initiative is impressive. Victoria smiled, maintaining appropriate distance. Thank you, Mr. Reed. Are you involved in education philanthropy? I oversee Morgan Stanley's community investment programs. Perhaps there might be partnership opportunities. Their conversation remained perfectly professional, but Victoria didn't miss the appreciation in his eyes as they lingered a moment too long on her. She filed away the encounter, a contingency perhaps, nothing more. 3 days later, Julian emailed Victoria's foundation address regarding potential collaboration. The exchange was entirely appropriate, focused on funding opportunities for inner-city STEM programs. Victoria mentioned it to Sebastian over dinner. Reed? I know of him, Sebastian said. Ambitious, smart. Catherine's nephew Charles works with him at Morgan Stanley. Victoria nodded. He seemed very knowledgeable about educational philanthropy. Sebastian encouraged the professional relationship, unaware of the subtle current beneath the surface. Over the following weeks, Victoria and Julian met twice for coffee to discuss foundation business, each meeting documented with proper follow-up emails that included Sebastian and the foundation board. During their third meeting, in a quiet corner of an upscale cafe, Julian's hand brushed hers as she reached for her water glass. The touch lingered a fraction too long. I should apologize, Julian said quietly, for finding it difficult to focus entirely on business when meeting with you. Victoria raised an eyebrow. That would be inappropriate, Mr. Reed. Completely, he agreed. And yet, she changed the subject smoothly, maintaining professional boundaries while allowing just enough ambiguity to keep possibilities open. Julian was handsome, young, ambitious, and potentially useful. That evening, Sebastian experienced a concerning episode during dinner, suddenly setting down his fork and pressing his hand to his chest. Sebastian? Victoria was at his side instantly. What's wrong? Nothing, just indigestion, he muttered, but his face had paled slightly. Victoria insisted on calling Dr. Patel, who recommended bringing Sebastian to his private clinic for evaluation. The ECG showed minor irregularities, nothing conclusive but enough for Dr. Patel to adjust Sebastian's medication. Has this happened before? Dr. Patel asked Sebastian directly. Not exactly like this, Sebastian admitted. He's been having chest discomfort on and off for weeks, Victoria interjected. He dismisses it, but I've noticed. Sebastian looked at her with confusion. It hasn't been that frequent. Dr. Patel made notes. Let's schedule a more comprehensive workup. In the meantime, reduce stress and monitor any symptoms. In the car returning home, Sebastian turned to Victoria. "Weeks? I've had occasional heartburn, but nothing concerning." Victoria took his hand, her expression earnest. "You may not notice the patterns like I do. You had that same pained expression at the Henderson dinner and after your board meeting last Thursday." Sebastian seemed to search his memory. "Perhaps you're right. I just want you healthy," Victoria said, squeezing his hand. "You're working too hard." The seed of doubt was growing. Victoria began subtly rearranging their life around Sebastian's condition. She cancelled high-stress social engagements, citing his health. She spoke in hushed tones to his closest friends about her concerns, ensuring word spread within their circle. She reorganized his medication, insisting on managing his pills personally. "I don't need to be babied," Sebastian protested one evening as Victoria counted out his medications. "It's not babying to want my husband around for as long as possible," she replied. "Besides, Dr. Rothman said the new supplement might cause drowsiness. I want to make sure you're taking it properly." Doctor Leon Rothman was a cardiologist Victoria had sought out for a second opinion, chosen specifically because his approach favored aggressive treatment and medications. Unlike Dr. Patel's measured approach, Dr. Rothman had immediately prescribed additional supplements and medications based largely on Victoria's reported observations. Sebastian's executive assistant, Rachel Woods, became an unexpected obstacle in Victoria's narrative. Having worked with Sebastian for 15 years, the efficient and observant woman seemed skeptical of Victoria's concerns. Mr. Freeman completed the Tokyo conference call and 2 board meetings yesterday with his usual sharpness, Rachel noted, when Victoria called to suggest rescheduling an important investor meeting. "He seemed energetic this morning." "That's because he's pushing himself," Victoria replied smoothly. "He won't show weakness publicly, but he was exhausted afterward. Dr. Rothman specifically advised against these marathon meeting days." Rachel's tone remained professionally neutral. "Of course, Mrs. Freeman. I'll speak with him directly about rescheduling." Victoria recognized Rachel as a potential threat, someone whose loyalty to Sebastian predated her arrival, and who observed him daily in a professional context where Victoria wasn't present. After that conversation, Victoria made a point of bringing Sebastian lunch at his office frequently, establishing her presence and keeping closer tabs on his interactions with his staff. Meanwhile, her relationship with Julian Reed evolved cautiously. What began as seemingly accidental touches and loaded glances progressed to encrypted text messages and carefully orchestrated accidental encounters at charity functions. "This is dangerous," Julian whispered during a momentary private exchange at a gallery opening, while Sebastian was engaged in conversation across the room. "Life without danger is hardly worth living," Victoria replied, maintaining her poised smile as she moved away to rejoin her husband. Their first actual rendezvous occurred 2 months later, when Victoria claimed a day-long foundation meeting to spend 6 hours in Julian's Tribeca apartment. The physical chemistry was undeniable, but Victoria was careful to reveal nothing substantial about her marriage or her plans. "I'm not naive enough to think I'm the first man who's caught your attention since your marriage," Julian said afterward, watching her reapply her makeup. Victoria glanced at him in the mirror. "And I'm not naive enough to explain myself to someone who has as much to lose as I do if discretion fails." Julian laughed. "Fair enough, but I'm curious. Sebastian Freeman is considered one of the most brilliant minds in American business. What doesn't he see?" Victoria finished with her lipstick before answering. "Men like Sebastian see what they choose to see. No matter how brilliant, they have blind spots, especially when it comes to those closest to them." The affair provided Victoria with more than physical satisfaction. It gave her a glimpse of the freedom that awaited her once her plan succeeded. Julian was ambitious, connected, and most importantly, understood the rules of their arrangement. He never pushed for more than Victoria offered, recognizing the transaction's nature of their relationship. As Victoria carefully cultivated both her public image as devoted wife and her private escape with Julian, Sebastian's behavior began to change subtly. He became more observant, more likely to question inconsistencies in Victoria's accounts of his health episodes. He scheduled a private appointment with Dr. Patel without informing Victoria beforehand. "I thought we agreed to attend medical appointments together," Victoria said, when she discovered the meeting from a notification on his shared calendar. "It was a routine follow-up," Sebastian replied, his expression unreadable. "No need to disrupt your day." Victoria maintained her composure, but inwardly, alarm bells sounded. She needed to accelerate her timeline. The opportunity came during a weekend at the Hamptons estate. Sebastian's oldest friend, Richard Harrington, joined them for dinner, a tradition dating back decades. Richard, a retired judge with a sharp mind and sharper tongue, had always maintained a polite but distant relationship with Victoria. "You're looking well, Sebastian," Richard observed over brandy after dinner, while Victoria pretended to focus on a book nearby. "The sea air agrees with you." "Victoria's health regimen is working wonders," Sebastian replied with a fond glance toward his wife, "though sometimes I think she believes I'm more fragile than I am." Richard's eyebrow raised slightly. "Oh? I hadn't realized there were concerns." Victoria closed her book, joining the conversation seamlessly. "Sebastian minimizes everything. The doctors have been monitoring his heart condition for months now." "Heart condition?" Richard looked genuinely surprised. "You never mentioned this, Sebastian." Sebastian's expression flickered momentarily. "It's not as serious as Victoria suggests. Some minor concerns being managed with medication." "Minor?" Victoria's voice carried just the right note of loving exasperation. "Sebastian, Dr. Rothman specifically used the phrase concerning progression at your last appointment." Richard studied his old friend with new concern, while Sebastian seemed to process Victoria's characterization of his health. The seed of doubt Victoria had planted was blooming, spreading beyond their private life into Sebastian's wider circle. Later that night, as they prepared for bed, Sebastian watched Victoria through the bathroom mirror as she completed her skincare routine. "You're very protective of me," he observed, his tone neutral. Victoria met his eyes in the reflection. "Of course I am. I love you. Sometimes I wonder if you see me clearly, or just the illness you're afraid of." Victoria turned to face him directly. "What do you mean? Dr. Patel doesn't seem nearly as concerned as Dr. Rothman, or as concerned as you are." Victoria crossed to him, placing her hands on his chest. "Dr. Patel is being cautious about worrying you. He and I have spoken privately." This was a calculated risk. Sebastian could verify this claim with Dr. Patel, but Victoria was counting on medical privacy protocols, and Sebastian's reluctance to suggest his wife was lying, making such verification unlikely. Sebastian covered her hands with his own. "What exactly did Patel tell you that he didn't tell me?" Victoria let vulnerability show in her expression. "That given your family history, these symptoms shouldn't be minimized. Your father died of a heart attack at 62, Sebastian. I don't want to lose you the way Catherine did, watching helplessly as you work yourself to death." The mention of Catherine and Sebastian's father struck precisely as intended. His expression softened, and he pulled Victoria into an embrace. "You won't lose me," he murmured into her hair. "Promise me you'll slow down," Victoria pressed. "The company can function without your constant attention. Your health needs to be the priority now." Sebastian nodded slowly. "Perhaps you're right." 2 weeks later, Sebastian announced his intention to step back further from daily operations at Freeman Innovations, citing health concerns. The company stock fluctuated briefly before stabilizing, as the transition plan had been gradually implemented over the previous year. For Victoria, this represented significant progress. Sebastian spending less time at the office meant more time under her observation and influence. It meant fewer interactions with people like Rachel, who might counter her narrative, and it created a public record of Sebastian's declining health that would make his eventual death less surprising. What Victoria didn't realize was that Sebastian had begun keeping a private journal, documenting his actual symptoms versus those Victoria reported to his doctors. Nor did she notice the subtle security upgrades to their apartment, including cameras in common areas that backed up to servers only Sebastian could access. As autumn arrived in New York, Victoria believed her golden cage was being built exactly to specification. Sebastian was increasingly isolated, increasingly dependent on her management of his health and social calendar. His medications, now a complex regimen of pills for blood pressure, heart health, circulation and sleep, were exclusively handled by Victoria. Sebastian never noticed when Victoria occasionally replaced his heart medication with harmless but identical-looking supplements, just enough to ensure his symptoms persisted, without raising medical alarms. "I'm concerned about these intermittent events," Dr. Rothman said during a follow-up appointment, reviewing the symptom diary Victoria had meticulously maintained. "We might need to consider more aggressive treatment options." "Whatever you recommend, Doctor," Victoria replied, her hand protectively covering Sebastian's. Money is no object when it comes to his health. Sebastian observed this exchange with an unreadable expression, squeezing Victoria's hand in apparent gratitude. That night, as Victoria slipped away to the guest bathroom to text Julian about their next rendezvous, she didn't see Sebastian open his private safe and review the growing file labeled simply Victoria. The game continued, with each player making calculated moves on a board only they could fully see. Sebastian Freeman sat alone in his private study at 2:17 a.m., the glow of his computer screen illuminating his face in the otherwise darkened room. Before him lay a digital mosaic of his wife's betrayal, text messages, location data, pharmacy records, and surveillance images, all meticulously organized in folders. The evidence had accumulated gradually over the past 3 months, a slow-building case file that could no longer be denied or rationalized away. It had begun with inconsistencies. Victoria's account of his symptoms rarely matched his actual experience. Doctors' reports seemed to contain observations he couldn't reconcile with his own condition. Medications increased in number and dosage despite test results that showed minimal issues. Tonight, however, marked the point of no return. "Access granted," murmured Sebastian, as Victoria's encrypted messaging app opened on his screen. He'd hired a cybersecurity specialist, not from his own company, but a freelancer paid in cash, to develop the backdoor access. The morality of such invasion of privacy might have troubled him once, but that Sebastian Freeman had died the moment he first suspected his wife was slowly poisoning him. The messages between Victoria and Julian Reed scrolled before his eyes. V. How much longer do we need to wait? J. Patience. These things can't be rushed. V. Easy for you to say. You're not the one playing nurse to a man who should have been gone months ago. J. What does the doctor say? V. Rothman is useless. All talk, no action. The other medications aren't working fast enough. Sebastian's hands trembled slightly as he continued reading their calculated discussion of his health, his medications, and their future plans. The message that struck him most deeply wasn't about his health, but about his essence. V. He looks at me sometimes like he knows, like he can see through everything. The man built a tech empire. I sometimes wonder if I underestimated his perception. J. You worry too much. Men like him have massive blind spots. Their egos make them vulnerable. If he suspected anything real, you'd already know. V. I suppose. His precious Catherine probably never gave him reason to doubt. Sebastian closed the laptop slowly, removing all traces of his digital intrusion. The pain that washed over him wasn't just betrayal. It was recognition of his own failure to see what was happening. The brilliant mind that had anticipated market shifts and technological revolutions had missed the threat sleeping beside him every night. Catherine would have seen through her immediately, he whispered to the empty room. His late wife had possessed an uncanny ability to read people, a skill Sebastian had appreciated, but never fully developed himself. Too focused on ideas and innovations, he'd always been somewhat blind to human manipulation. Catherine had been his protection against such threats, until cancer had taken her, leaving him vulnerable in ways he hadn't recognized. Sebastian moved to the window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. The city never truly slept, lights twinkling like earthbound stars. Neither would he sleep tonight. Not with the knowledge that his wife was slowly killing him through stress, manipulated medical treatment, and possibly, he would need to verify this, actual poison. By morning, Sebastian had made his decision. Victoria Hayes Freeman would not succeed in her plan, but neither would she simply be exposed and discarded. No, Sebastian had built his fortune on strategic thinking, on seeing opportunities where others saw only problems. This betrayal would become the framework for justice, poetic, complete, and devastating. You're looking especially tired today, Victoria observed over breakfast, her voice laced with practiced concern. Did you take the new medication Dr. Rothman prescribed? Sebastian nodded weakly, allowing his hand to tremble slightly as he reached for his coffee. It makes me dizzy. I'm not sure it's helping. Victoria's eyes brightened almost imperceptibly, a predator sensing weakness. We should call him. Perhaps the dosage needs adjustment. Perhaps, Sebastian agreed, letting his voice sound strained. I've been thinking, Victoria. We should take that trip you've been suggesting. The one to the Caribbean. Victoria set down her teacup. Really? Are you sure you're up to traveling? No, Sebastian admitted, "but I need to start enjoying what time I have left. The business is in good hands, and He paused for effect. "I want to create more memories with you while I can." The calculation flickered behind Victoria's eyes, weighing the opportunity against potential complications. "That sounds wonderful, darling, but let's consult with Dr. Rothman first. Perhaps in a few weeks when you're stronger." Sebastian nodded, appearing defeated. "You're always looking out for me." As Victoria busied herself clearing breakfast, Sebastian observed her movements with new awareness. The precision with which she organized his medications, the careful way she documented his supposed symptoms in her health journal, the subtle check of her secure phone when she thought he wasn't watching. Every action now revealed the architecture of her deception. That afternoon, while Victoria attended a foundation meeting, Sebastian met with Robert Keller in an unmarked conference room at a midtown law firm, not Keller's usual office where Victoria might have connections or awareness. "This is extraordinary," Keller said after reviewing the evidence Sebastian had compiled. "Have you confronted her?" Sebastian shook his head. "That would end the game prematurely. I need your help with something more complex." "Anything, Sebastian. You know that. I want to change my will completely, but it must remain absolutely confidential." Keller leaned forward. "What do you have in mind?" For the next 2 hours, Sebastian outlined his plan in precise detail. The revised estate plan would leave Victoria with virtually nothing of value, while appearing to honor the letter of their prenuptial agreement. The bulk of his fortune would be directed elsewhere, to causes Victoria would find particularly galling. "There's one more thing," Sebastian said toward the end of their meeting. "I need to locate someone I've never met but who has a claim to my estate." Keller's eyebrows raised. "Sebastian, are you saying—" 26 years ago, before I met Catherine, there was a brief relationship. I was never informed of a child, but I recently received information suggesting otherwise." This was the part of Sebastian's plan that had come to him during the long, sleepless night. A memory of a letter he'd received 6 months ago and dismissed as a potential scam. A letter from someone claiming to be his son, born to a woman Sebastian had briefly dated during the early startup days of Freeman Innovations. He had intended to have his security team investigate, but the matter had slipped away during his health issues. Now it represented a critical piece of his counter-strategy. "I'll need discreet but thorough verification," Sebastian continued. "DNA testing, background checks, everything. But if this person is indeed my child, they deserve to know their father before it's too late." Keller nodded slowly. "I know just the investigator for this. Absolute discretion guaranteed." As Sebastian returned home that evening, he felt a strange sense of calm. The pieces were in motion. Now he needed to convince Victoria that his health was deteriorating faster than even her manipulations could account for. "I think you should cancel tomorrow's board meeting," Victoria suggested as she adjusted the pillows on their bed. "You can barely make it up the stairs without getting winded." Sebastian sat heavily on the edge of the mattress, playing his role perfectly. "You're right. I'll have Rachel reschedule." Victoria's phone buzzed with a text notification. Sebastian noticed how she angled the screen away from him as she checked it. "Foundation business?" he asked innocently. "Just Melissa checking in," Victoria replied smoothly. "She's worried about you too." Sebastian nodded and deliberately closed his eyes, appearing to drift towards sleep. Through barely open lids, he watched Victoria retreat to the ensuite bathroom, phone clutched in her hand. The bathroom fan switched on, cover for her conversation, but Sebastian had already installed a specialized listening device disguised as an electric toothbrush charger. Through his nearly invisible earpiece, he heard Victoria's whispered conversation. "It's accelerating faster than I expected. No, I don't think we need to do anything more. The new medication is affecting him strongly. Yes, I'm still going through with the Cayman trip plans. 3 weeks from now. I know, patience. You don't need to worry about the will. I've confirmed the terms with my attorney. 30% is more than enough to keep us both very comfortable for life." Sebastian controlled his breathing, maintaining the appearance of sleep as Victoria returned to the bedroom. He felt her watching him for a long moment before she slipped into bed beside him. "Good night, my love," she whispered, her voice a masterpiece of fraudulent affection. Over the next week, Sebastian carefully orchestrated his apparent decline. He arranged to stumble slightly during a charity event, allowing Victoria to showcase her devoted caretaking publicly. He scheduled and then conspicuously cancelled important meetings. He complained of vision problems and increasing fatigue, symptoms that would justify more intensive medical intervention. Victoria responded exactly as expected, increasing her management of his life, while simultaneously accelerating her secret plans. Sebastian tracked her communications with Julian Reed and noted their growing boldness, plans for their future, discussions of how to handle the public relations aspect of Sebastian's widow, finding new love after an appropriate mourning period. "I think we should update your medical directives," Victoria suggested one evening, presenting Sebastian with documents prepared by an attorney he'd never met. "Given your condition, we should be prepared for any scenario." Sebastian reviewed the papers with appropriate gratitude. "You think of everything." The documents, which he signed with deliberate shakiness, would have given Victoria extraordinary power over his medical decisions, had Sebastian not already updated his actual advance directives with Robert Keller, designating his trusted physician Dr. Patel as his healthcare proxy. 2 weeks into his performance, Sebastian received confirmation from Keller's investigator. DNA testing had verified that Alexander Chen, a 26-year-old environmental engineer in Seattle, was indeed Sebastian's biological son. The report included photographs of a serious-looking young man with Sebastian's eyes and determined chin, but Asian features from his mother's heritage. According to the investigation, Alexander had been raised by his mother and stepfather, only learning of his biological father's identity after his mother's death from breast cancer the previous year. He seems to have made no attempts to capitalize on the connection, the investigator noted. He has a modest life, strong academic credentials, and an apparent commitment to environmental causes. His letter to you appears to have been motivated by medical history concerns rather than financial interest. Sebastian studied the young man's face, feeling an unexpected connection. Here was something real amid the elaborate deception that had become his life. A son he had never known, a legitimate heir untainted by Victoria's machinations. That same afternoon, Sebastian arranged a secure video call with Alexander, bypassing his usual communications channels that Victoria might monitor. "I received your letter," Sebastian began when Alexander's face appeared on the screen. "I apologize for the delayed response. Recent events have clarified priorities." Alexander looked uncomfortable, but direct, a trait Sebastian recognized from his own mirror. "I wasn't sure you'd ever contact me. I understand this is awkward. Life is full of unexpected turns," Sebastian replied. "I'd like to meet in person if you're willing. There's a great deal we should discuss." 4 days later, using a medical appointment as cover, Sebastian met Alexander at a private suite in the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. Victoria believed he was undergoing specialized cardiac testing. In reality, he was meeting his son for the first time. "You have your mother's smile," Sebastian observed as they shook hands, "but my mother's eyes. You wouldn't remember her, but there's a definite resemblance." Alexander seemed overwhelmed. "This is surreal. Growing up, Mom always said my biological father was a brilliant man who didn't know about me. I assumed that was just to make me feel better. Your mother and I were together briefly during the startup phase of my first company," Sebastian explained. "When we parted ways, I had no idea she was pregnant. She never told me. She said you were singularly focused on building your company. She didn't want to complicate that with an unexpected child." Sebastian nodded slowly. "She was right about my focus then. I was obsessed with success, with proving myself. I might not have been a good father at that time." They spoke for hours, filling in the missing pieces of their shared history. Sebastian learned that Alexander had inherited his analytical mind, but had directed it toward environmental engineering rather than technology or business. He had graduated from MIT, worked briefly for the EPA, and now developed water purification systems for developing nations. "I'm not here for your money," Alexander said bluntly as their conversation progressed. "I have a good life. I just thought medical history is important, and maybe knowing where I came from would answer some questions I've always had." Sebastian studied the young man thoughtfully. "I believe you, and that's precisely why I need to tell you something important." Over the next hour, Sebastian explained his situation with Victoria, the manipulation, the evidence of her plans, and his counter-strategy. Alexander listened with growing concern. "That's horrifying," he said finally. "But why tell me this?" "I'm essentially a stranger." "Because you're my son," Sebastian replied simply. and because I'm revising my estate plan to make you my primary heir. You need to understand what that might mean, the scrutiny, the potential challenges from Victoria, the responsibility. Alexander shook his head. I don't want or need your fortune. It's not about want or need, Sebastian said firmly. It's about legacy and responsibility. I've built something significant and I'd prefer it continue to do good in the world. Based on what I've learned about your work and character, I believe you're the right person to ensure that happens. By the end of their meeting, Alexander had reluctantly agreed to Sebastian's proposal, understanding the larger purpose behind it. They arranged secure communications channels and planned a follow-up meeting. As Sebastian returned to New York, he felt both a sense of urgency and unexpected peace. In finding his son, he had discovered not just an heir, but a purpose for the battle ahead. Victoria's preparations for their Caribbean trip intensified as Sebastian's apparent condition worsened. She had selected a remote private island resort with minimal staff, perfect for privacy, she emphasized, though Sebastian recognized it as isolation. I've arranged everything, she told him over dinner one evening. A private villa on the beach, a personal chef and a nurse who will travel with us to manage your medications. You've thought of everything, Sebastian murmured appreciatively. When do we leave? 2 weeks from Thursday. I've already cleared your schedule and spoken with Dr. Rothman. He's preparing special travel medications and emergency provisions. Sebastian nodded weakly. It sounds perfect. Just the two of us, away from everything. What Victoria didn't know was that Sebastian had made his own arrangements for that trip, plans that would ensure she never achieved her goal. The following morning, while Victoria attended a spa appointment, Sebastian experienced a genuine health episode. As he reviewed documents in his home office, a crushing pressure spread across his chest, accompanied by pain radiating down his left arm. The symptoms, the real symptoms, not Victoria's fabricated ones, were unmistakable. With shaking hands, he called Dr. Patel directly. I need to see you immediately. No records, no notifications to my wife or staff, he managed to say, before the pain intensified. Dr. Patel, understanding the urgency, arranged for a discreet admission to New York Presbyterian Hospital under an alias. By the time Victoria returned from her appointment, Sebastian had been examined, treated, and returned home, with a new, sobering understanding of his situation. It was a mild heart attack, Dr. Patel had informed him, not severe enough to cause permanent damage, but a serious warning sign. The blood tests show concerning levels of certain compounds that aren't explained by your prescribed medications. She's poisoning me, Sebastian said flatly. Not enough to kill quickly, but to weaken, to create a pattern of decline. Dr. Patel's expression had been grim. The evidence suggests something is interfering with your prescribed treatments. These levels wouldn't occur naturally or from the medications I've prescribed. Can you document this? Legally defensible documentation? Already done. I've ordered additional tests under strict confidence. But Sebastian, you need to consider your immediate safety. If what you suspect is true, I have a plan in motion, Sebastian had assured him. But this changes the timeline. I need to accelerate everything. That evening, Sebastian nearly revealed everything when Victoria served him tea personally prepared in their kitchen, a new evening ritual she had instituted weeks ago. It's a special blend Dr. Rothman recommended, she explained, placing the cup before him, for circulation and sleep. Sebastian watched her arranging his evening medications beside the tea, her movements practiced and precise. For a moment, rage threatened to overwhelm his strategic thinking. How simple it would be to confront her now, to watch her facade crumble as he revealed all he knew. But that would be a hollow victory compared to what he had planned. You're so good to me, he said instead, lifting the cup to his lips but not drinking. When Victoria turned away, he emptied the tea into a special container concealed in his robe pocket, another sample for Dr. Patel's evidence collection. Later that night, Sebastian experienced another moment of danger when Victoria nearly discovered him updating his secure files. He had been reviewing Alexander's background information when her footsteps approached the study unexpectedly. Sebastian barely managed to switch screens to innocuous foundation documents before she entered. Still working? Victoria asked, her tone concerned. It's after midnight. Couldn't sleep, Sebastian replied. Thought I'd review the education initiative proposals. Victoria approached, resting her hands on his shoulders. You're pushing yourself too hard. Come to bed. The work will still be here tomorrow. As she leaned down to kiss his cheek, Sebastian caught a glimpse of her phone screen reflecting in the darkened window, a message notification from Julian Reed that she had yet to read. "You're right," Sebastian agreed, closing his laptop. "Sleep is more important now." With his genuine health crisis adding urgency, Sebastian arranged a final meeting with Robert Keller and his estate planning team. They gathered at Keller's home on a Sunday morning, while Victoria believed Sebastian was undergoing specialized cardiac tests with Dr. Rothman, a fiction she had readily accepted. "The documentation is complete," Keller confirmed, presenting Sebastian with the finalized estate plan. "Upon your death, 30% of your personal assets will technically pass to Victoria as per the prenuptial agreement. However, my personal assets will consist primarily of the Manhattan penthouse, which carries a previously undisclosed mortgage, and ownership shares in the Freeman Foundation, which cannot be sold or transferred and generate no income," Sebastian completed. While the actual assets, the investment portfolios, real property, art collections, and cash reserves will have been transferred to the new holding structure controlled by Alexander, Keller nodded. "Precisely. Everything is legally sound, though she will undoubtedly challenge it, which triggers the evidence release clause," and Sebastian said with grim satisfaction, "ensuring that any attempt to contest the will results in the automatic public disclosure of all evidence regarding her actions." "It's as airtight as we can make it," Keller confirmed. "The final piece is the letter to be delivered to her privately after the will reading." "Are you certain about that part?" Sebastian considered the question carefully. The letter, containing his personal message to Victoria, along with selected evidence of her betrayal, was perhaps the most important component of his plan, not for legal reasons, but for justice to be complete. "Yes," he said finally, "she deserves to know that she failed, that I saw through her completely. That knowledge will be a more effective punishment than any legal consequence." As he signed the final documents, Sebastian felt the weight of mortality pressing upon him. The mild heart attack had been a stark reminder that Victoria might not need to complete her plan. His health was genuinely fragile, independent of her manipulations. "There's one more thing," Sebastian said as they concluded. "I need to meet with Alexander again before the Caribbean trip. If something happens to me during that trip, something that appears natural or accidental, I need to ensure all these arrangements activate immediately." Keller's expression darkened. "Sebastian, if you believe you're in imminent danger, I'm taking precautions," Sebastian assured him. "But we need to be prepared for all contingencies. Victoria believes the trip is her opportunity. I intend to make it mine instead." As Sebastian returned home that afternoon, he found Victoria in their bedroom packing a small suitcase. "What's this?" he asked, genuinely surprised. Victoria looked up, momentarily flustered, before regaining her composure. "Oh, I was going to tell you at dinner. The foundation needs me to attend an emergency meeting in Boston tomorrow. One of our major education initiatives has hit a funding snag. I'll be back Wednesday." Sebastian recognized the lie immediately. Her secure phone had shown messages coordinating a meeting with Julian Reed in a Boston hotel, but he nodded understandingly. "Of course. The foundation work is important." Victoria approached him, placing a hand on his chest. "Are you sure you'll be all right for 2 days? I can have the night nurse stay over." "I'll manage," Sebastian assured her. "Rachel will check in, and Dr. Patel is available if needed." Victoria frowned slightly at the mention of Dr. Patel rather than Dr. Rothman, but quickly covered it. "Call me if you need anything at all." As she kissed him goodbye, Sebastian reflected on the complex emotions behind this simple gesture. In it was every false promise, every manipulative concern, every calculated touch that had characterized their marriage. Yet there was also a strange intimacy in their mutual deception, each playing a role for the other, each believing they controlled the narrative. After Victoria departed for her rendezvous with Julian, Sebastian sat alone in their living room, looking out at the Manhattan skyline as evening descended on the city. In 2 weeks they would leave for the Caribbean, a trip from which Sebastian knew one of them would not return unchanged. The question was which one? The morning sun filtered through the expansive windows of Sebastian's penthouse study as he methodically organized the physical evidence he had accumulated. Documents were carefully arranged in folders, digital backups secured on encrypted drives, and copies distributed to trusted individuals with explicit instructions on when and how to use them. With each file he processed, Sebastian felt a curious detachment, as if he were preparing not his own revenge, but someone else's justice. Victoria returned from her foundation emergency, looking refreshed and energized. Sebastian noticed a new diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist, undoubtedly a gift from Julian, purchased with money that ultimately traced back to Sebastian's own accounts. "You look well," Sebastian commented as she unpacked. "The foundation crisis must have resolved satisfactorily." Victoria's smile flickered briefly. "Yes, we managed to secure alternative funding. But more importantly, how are you feeling? You look tired." "Dr. Patel adjusted my medication while you were gone," Sebastian replied, watching her reaction carefully. He was concerned about some interactions. The subtle tightening around Victoria's eyes confirmed his suspicions. She disliked any medical decisions made without her involvement, particularly those involving Dr. Patel, whom she hadn't yet managed to manipulate. "I wish you'd waited until I returned," she said, her tone perfectly calibrated between concern and mild reproach. "Dr. Rothman has a more complete understanding of your treatment plan." Sebastian nodded apologetically. "It seemed urgent at the time. I had some concerning symptoms." Victoria was beside him instantly, hand on his forehead as if checking for fever. "What symptoms? Why didn't you call me?" "Dizziness, confusion. Nothing severe, but worrying enough to consult Patel. I didn't want to disrupt your important meeting." The calculation played out visibly behind Victoria's eyes, concern that Sebastian's condition might deteriorate too quickly before their Caribbean trip, balanced against satisfaction that his health was declining according to her timeline. "I'm not leaving you alone again before our trip," she declared, her voice firm with false devotion. "The Foundation can manage without me for a few weeks." Over the following days, Sebastian found himself in the strange position of pretending to be sicker than he actually was, while Victoria pretended to be more concerned than she actually was. Their marriage had become an elaborate theatre production where both lead actors were performing different plays for different purposes. The genuine heart attack had left Sebastian weaker than he would have preferred for this final act, but it also provided perfect cover for accelerating his plans. Under the guise of getting his affairs in order just in case, he arranged final meetings with key people in his life. His first priority was a private dinner with Richard Harrington, his oldest friend and confidant. They met at Richard's Upper East Side apartment, away from Victoria's watchful presence. "You look like hell," Richard observed bluntly, as Sebastian settled into an armchair. "Honesty, the luxury of true friendship," Sebastian replied with a tired smile. "I've missed it." Richard studied him carefully. "Are you going to tell me what's really happening? And don't give me the sanitized version Victoria's been spreading through your social circle." For the next hour, Sebastian explained everything: Victoria's manipulation, her affair with Julian Reed, the evidence of her attempting to hasten his death, and his counter-strategy. Richard listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly grim. "I should have seen it," he said finally, his voice heavy with regret. "Catherine would have spotted her true nature immediately." "We all have blind spots," Sebastian replied. "Mine nearly proved fatal." Richard leaned forward. "Let me ask the obvious question. Why not simply divorce her and expose her crimes? Why this elaborate plan?" Sebastian was silent for a moment, considering how to articulate the complex emotions driving his decisions. Divorce would give her a clean break and the prenup settlement. Criminal charges would be difficult to prove conclusively and might drag on for years. He paused, his gaze distant. "But there's more to it than practical considerations." "Revenge," Richard supplied. "Justice," Sebastian corrected. "Victoria targeted me because of my wealth and position. She viewed me as a means to an end, her ticket to the life she believed she deserved. I want her to experience the complete reversal of fortune that she planned for me." Richard nodded slowly. "And your newly discovered son? Are you certain he's not another opportunist?" "Alexander is genuinely disinterested in my wealth," Sebastian said with surprising warmth. "That's precisely why he's the right person to inherit it. He sees money as a tool for positive impact, not personal indulgence." As their conversation continued into the night, Sebastian found himself speaking not just of his plans for Victoria, but of his regrets, his accomplishments, and his hopes for the legacy he would leave behind. It was, in many ways, the conversation of a dying man, not because Sebastian expected to die immediately, but because he recognized that life was always more fragile than one expected. "Promise me something," Sebastian said as they parted. Whatever happens in the coming weeks, make sure the truth is known, not for vengeance but for justice. Richard clasped his friend's shoulder. You have my word. The next significant conversation occurred with Rachel Woods, Sebastian's long-serving executive assistant. They met in a secure conference room at Freeman Innovations headquarters, ostensibly to discuss transition planning for the company. I've worked with you for 15 years, Rachel said after Sebastian had explained a portion of the situation. I've seen you through technological revolutions, market crashes, and Catherine's illness. I know when you're not telling me everything. Sebastian smiled faintly. You've always been too perceptive for your own good. It's why you hired me. Her expression softened. What aren't you telling me? Sebastian considered how much to reveal. Rachel had been unfailingly loyal, but he was reluctant to burden her with knowledge that might put her in a difficult position. Victoria is not who she appears to be, he said finally. After I'm gone, there will be revelations. When that happens, the company will need stability. The executive team will look to you. Rachel's eyes widened slightly as she processed the implications. You've known all along that she's manipulating your health situation, haven't you? Let's just say I've taken precautions to ensure the truth emerges at the appropriate time. Rachel nodded, understanding the boundaries of their conversation. The board is fully prepared for your extended absence during your Caribbean trip. David Chen has temporary leadership authority with oversight from the executive committee. And the special projects division transitions? Completed last week as you requested. Alexander Chen has been added to the secure access list for the research archives, though the team believes it's a new environmental consultant, as instructed. Sebastian felt a surge of gratitude for Rachel's efficiency and discretion. There's one more thing, a personal request. After I'm gone, whether that's next month or next year, would you be willing to act as a liaison with Alexander? He'll need someone who understands the company culture, someone trustworthy. Of course, Rachel agreed without hesitation, though I still hope you'll be around to make those introductions yourself. As their departure date for the Caribbean approached, Sebastian arranged one final crucial meeting with Alexander. They met at a medical clinic in Connecticut, where Sebastian was ostensibly undergoing specialized treatment. Victoria had reluctantly agreed to let him attend alone after Dr. Patel, coached by Sebastian, insisted that the procedure required the patient to be unaccompanied. Alexander arrived looking concerned. You look worse than when I saw you last month? Partly theater, partly reality, Sebastian admitted. My heart is indeed weaker than I'd like, but I'm emphasizing the symptoms for Victoria's benefit. They settled into the private consultation room that Sebastian had arranged for their meeting. Have you thought more about what we discussed? Sebastian asked. Alexander nodded, his expression serious. I've spent every day thinking about it. It's a lot to process. Finding out you're my biological father was life-changing enough, but this, he gestured vaguely, it's like something from a psychological thriller. I understand your hesitation. The responsibility I'm asking you to take on is enormous, and it comes with complications most heirs don't face. Alexander studied Sebastian carefully. I've been researching your company, your philanthropy work. It's impressive, genuinely innovative and impactful. My concerns aren't about the responsibility. They're about your motivations. Sebastian raised an eyebrow. Explain, is this about punishing your wife or about finding the right steward for your legacy? Because if it's primarily revenge, I'm not comfortable being the instrument of that. The question struck Sebastian with unexpected force. He had been so focused on justice for Victoria's betrayal that he hadn't fully examined his own motivations through an outsider's perspective. It began as the former, Sebastian admitted after a thoughtful pause. But as I've gotten to know you, it's evolved into the latter. Victoria's punishment is now secondary to ensuring that what I've built continues to benefit the world. Alexander seemed to accept this answer. I've reviewed all the documents your attorney sent. I understand the structure you've created and what would be expected of me. I'm prepared to accept the responsibility with one condition. Name it. If, when your plan succeeds and Victoria is left with nothing, I want your permission to establish a trust for her basic needs. Not luxury, not comfort, but enough that she isn't destitute. I can't be part of leaving anyone homeless, regardless of what they've done. Sebastian stared at his son in surprise. The compassion inherent in this request was something he hadn't considered. and something he recognized he should have. It was exactly the kind of balanced judgment that he would want in the steward of his legacy. "Agreed," Sebastian said finally. "It speaks well of you that you thought of this when I did not." The remainder of their meeting focused on practical matters, security protocols during Sebastian's upcoming trip, contingency plans for various scenarios, and Alexander's gradual introduction to key individuals at Freeman Innovations. By the time they parted, Sebastian felt a curious mixture of apprehension and peace. Whatever happened in the coming weeks, he had secured his legacy in the hands of someone worthy. 3 days before their scheduled departure for the Caribbean, Sebastian suffered another heart attack, this one more severe than the previous episode. Victoria found him collapsed in their bedroom and, to her credit, responded immediately by calling emergency services. Sebastian was rushed to New York Presbyterian Hospital, where Dr. Patel took personal charge of his care. It was a significant cardiac event, Dr. Patel explained to Victoria in the waiting room. "We've stabilized him, but this indicates a worrying progression of his condition." Victoria's expression conveyed perfect concern. "Will he recover enough to travel? We're supposed to leave for the Caribbean on Thursday." Dr. Patel's eyes narrowed slightly at this question, prioritizing travel over recovery, but his response remained professional. "Travel is inadvisable for at least 2 weeks. He needs monitoring and a stable environment." "He'll be devastated," Victoria said, her voice breaking convincingly. "He's been looking forward to this trip. It meant so much to him, to both of us." "His survival means more," Dr. Patel replied firmly. When Sebastian regained consciousness, he found Victoria beside his hospital bed, her expression a masterpiece of devoted concern. The monitoring equipment showed his weakened condition was not an act this time. "You scared me," Victoria said, squeezing his hand. "They're saying you can't travel." Sebastian managed a weak smile. "I'm sorry about our trip. Don't worry about that now. Focus on getting stronger." In her eyes, Sebastian could read the calculation, disappointment at the delayed opportunity, but also recognition that his worsening condition was advancing her timeline even without the isolated setting of their planned trip. What Victoria couldn't know was that this heart attack, though genuine and concerning, had activated the final phase of Sebastian's plan. While Sebastian remained hospitalized, Robert Keller expedited the remaining legal arrangements, and Dr. Patel collected additional evidence of medication tampering from blood tests that Victoria didn't know were being performed. For the next 5 days, Sebastian remained in the hospital, his condition gradually stabilizing, but remaining serious enough to justify continued medical supervision. Victoria was the perfect devoted wife, present during visiting hours, attentive to his needs, and apparently respectful of medical advice. Only Sebastian and Dr. Patel knew that she was gradually replacing some of Sebastian's prescribed medications with her own substitutions, delivered in food and drinks she personally prepared for him. On the 6th day, Sebastian's body simply gave out. The accumulated stress, the weakened heart muscle, and the subtle but persistent effects of Victoria's tampering combined with natural causes to bring about what his enemies and his wife had long desired. At 4:17 a.m., with Victoria asleep at home rather than at his bedside, Sebastian Freeman's heart stopped beating. Despite immediate medical intervention, he could not be resuscitated. Sebastian Freeman, technology pioneer and philanthropist, was pronounced dead at 4:36 a.m. Victoria received the call at 4:52 a.m. Her performance was flawless. Shock, disbelief, anguished questioning about why she hadn't been called to the hospital sooner, and finally, the broken acceptance of a grieving widow. "I can't believe he's gone," she sobbed to Dr. Patel over the phone. "We were supposed to have more time." "His heart was more severely damaged than we realized," Dr. Patel explained, his voice carefully neutral. "I'm deeply sorry for your loss, Mrs. Freeman." By sunrise, Victoria had composed herself sufficiently to begin the necessary arrangements. She contacted Robert Keller to initiate the legal processes, notified the Freeman Innovations executive team of their founder's passing, and began planning the funeral that would mark both an end and a beginning in her life. What no one could see, behind her red-rimmed eyes and grief-stricken expression, was the quiet satisfaction of a plan finally reaching fruition. Sebastian was gone, and soon his fortune would be hers to enjoy with Julian by her side. The days following Sebastian's death were a blur of activity, as Manhattan's elite prepared to honor one of its most influential figures. Victoria orchestrated the funeral arrangements with appropriate solemnity, selecting an exclusive funeral home, arranging for renowned speakers, and approving a guest list that included business leaders, politicians, and cultural figures. Throughout this process, Robert Keller remained at Victoria's side, assisting with legal matters while revealing nothing about Sebastian's revised estate plan. The lawyer's poker face never slipped, as Victoria made occasional references to financial transitions and estate matters that would need attention after the appropriate mourning period. Sebastian would want us to handle everything with dignity, Victoria told Keller as they reviewed funeral arrangements. He was always concerned with appearances. Indeed, Keller agreed neutrally. Sebastian was very thoughtful about his legacy. The funeral itself was a magisterial affair held at St. Thomas Church on Fifth Avenue. Over 1,000 mourners attended, with overflow crowds watching on screens set up outside. Victoria, draped in elegant black Valentino, played her role perfectly. The devastated widow dignified in grief, occasionally allowing her composure to crack just enough to appear authentic without becoming unseemly. Richard Harrington delivered a powerful eulogy that traced Sebastian's journey from ambitious young entrepreneur to technological visionary and philanthropist. Without ever glancing toward Victoria, he emphasized Sebastian's remarkable ability to see through facades and recognize true value in people and opportunities. Sebastian's greatest gift, Richard concluded, was his capacity for strategic foresight, seeing not just the next move but the entire game. Those who underestimated his perception often discovered too late that he was several steps ahead. Victoria didn't notice the subtle message embedded in these words, too focused on maintaining her performance and acknowledging the condolences of Manhattan's elite. She also failed to notice a young Asian-American man standing quietly at the back of the church, observing the proceedings with Sebastian's distinctive grey-blue eyes. Following the funeral, Victoria graciously declined offers to stay with friends, explaining that she needed privacy to process her grief. Alone in the penthouse that evening, she poured herself a generous glass of Sebastian's rare Macallan Scotch and finally allowed herself a genuine smile of triumph. "To us, my love," she whispered, raising her glass toward an imagined Julian. "It's finally done." Her first call was to her lover, using the secure phone she had always kept hidden from Sebastian. "It's over," she said simply when Julian answered. "He's gone." "Are you all right?" Julian asked, his voice appropriately concerned for any potential listeners. "As well as can be expected," Victoria replied, maintaining the grieving widow persona despite their privacy. "The reading of the will is scheduled for next Friday. Keller suggested we give it appropriate time after the funeral." "Of course. Have you heard anything about the provisions?" Victoria sipped her scotch. "Nothing specific, but I had my attorney review the prenuptial agreement again. The death clause is clear, 30% of Sebastian's personal assets, which should amount to approximately 90 million at minimum. Plus, I'll retain the penthouse and receive dividends from his company shares. More than enough for our needs," Julian said, a smile evident in his voice. "Have you thought more about Bali?" They had often discussed relocating to Bali after an appropriate mourning period, establishing a luxurious compound far from prying eyes where they could enjoy their newfound wealth. "We should wait at least 6 months before being seen together," Victoria cautioned. "Appearances matter, but yes, I've been researching properties on the quiet." Their conversation continued, growing increasingly explicit about both their relationship and their plans for Sebastian's money. Victoria, flush with victory, was less cautious than usual, never suspecting that Sebastian's surveillance systems remained active, recording every word for later use. As the days passed, Victoria maintained her public persona as the grieving widow while privately preparing for her new life. She met discreetly with her personal attorney to discuss the upcoming will reading, reviewed her financial options, and began subtle inquiries about international real estate through third parties. "Mrs. Freeman, I've been asked to provide you with these documents before Friday's reading," Robert Keller said during a brief meeting 3 days after the funeral. He handed her a sealed envelope bearing Sebastian's personal monogram. "What is this?" Victoria asked, turning the envelope over curiously. "Mr. Freeman prepared several personal messages to be delivered after his passing. This one is for you alone. His instructions were that you should read it privately before the formal will reading." Victoria nodded solemnly. Thank you, Robert. I'll cherish his final words. Once Keller had departed, Victoria opened the envelope with trembling fingers, partly from genuine emotion, partly from anticipation of what financial details Sebastian might have shared privately. Inside was a single sheet of Sebastian's personal stationery, bearing a brief handwritten message. Victoria, by the time you read this, I will be gone, and you will be anticipating the next phase of your life. Before the formal reading of my will, I wanted to share a personal thought with you. In business and in life, I've always believed that perception is reality only until the truth emerges, and the truth always emerges, eventually. I'll see you on Friday. Sebastian. Victoria read the message several times, a faint uneasiness creeping through her satisfaction. The wording seemed odd, almost ominous. What did he mean by, I'll see you on Friday, when he was dead? And the reference to truth emerging, what truth was he referring to? She dismissed her concerns as paranoia. Sebastian had likely written this note months ago when his health first began to decline. The slightly cryptic nature was just his philosophical tendencies showing through. The day before the will reading, Victoria received an unexpected visitor. Rachel Woods, Sebastian's executive assistant, arrived at the penthouse with a box of personal items from Sebastian's office. Mrs. Freeman, I thought you might want these, Rachel said formally, as Victoria welcomed her inside. Mr. Freeman kept these items in his private office. The company believed they should be returned to his family. Victoria accepted the box with appropriate gratitude. Thank you, Rachel. You were invaluable to Sebastian. I know he considered you more than just an employee. Rachel's expression remained professionally neutral. Mr. Freeman was an exceptional leader. His absence is deeply felt throughout the organization. As Rachel turned to leave, she paused momentarily. The transfer of operational authority has proceeded exactly as Mr. Freeman arranged. He was very thorough in his preparations. Something in Rachel's tone caused Victoria's uneasiness to return, but she maintained her composure. Sebastian always planned for every contingency. It was what made him so successful. Indeed, Rachel replied. He saw patterns that others missed. After Rachel's departure, Victoria examined the contents of the box. Personal photographs, awards, and mementos from Sebastian's career. Nothing of particular value or significance, merely the sentimental items one would expect. Still, the conversation had left her vaguely disturbed. That night she called Julian again. I'm feeling that is unsettled, she admitted. Something doesn't feel right. Pre-inheritance jitters, Julian assured her. Completely normal. By this time tomorrow, you'll be officially wealthy in your own right, and all these concerns will seem foolish. Victoria wanted to believe him. You're probably right. Keller hasn't given any indication that there might be issues with the will. Of course not. You played your role perfectly. No one suspects anything. Victoria took comfort in Julian's confidence, but Sebastian's note continued to trouble her. I'll see you on Friday. Such a strange choice of words from a man who knew he was dying. Friday morning arrived bright and clear, a beautiful spring day that seemed to mock the solemnity of the occasion. Victoria dressed carefully in a tailored black Chanel suit that conveyed respectful mourning while highlighting her figure. Today would set the stage for her future, and appearances mattered more than ever. As her driver transported her to Keller's law offices in Midtown Manhattan, Victoria mentally reviewed the expected proceedings, standard legal formalities, the reading of the will, processing of inheritance documents, and finally confirmation of her new financial status. By evening, she would be independently wealthy, her years of calculation and performance rewarded with permanent security. Victoria entered the tastefully appointed conference room at Keller, Bennett & Associates, with perfect composure. She acknowledged the various attendees with appropriate solemnity. Richard Harrington, David Chen from Freeman Innovations, several foundation board members, and of course Robert Keller himself. What she didn't expect was the presence of the young Asian-American man seated quietly in the corner. Victoria didn't recognize him from Sebastian's business or social circles, and his presence at this private legal proceeding was puzzling. Mrs. Freeman, Keller greeted her formally. Thank you for joining us. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce Alexander Chen. Mr. Chen is here at Sebastian's specific request. Victoria extended her hand politely. I don't believe we've met, Mr. Chen. Were you a business associate of my husband's? Alexander stood, accepting her handshake with a firm grip. His eyes, so strikingly similar to Sebastian's that Victoria felt momentarily disoriented, met hers directly. "Not exactly, Mrs. Freeman. I'm Sebastian's son." Victoria's perfectly manicured nails dug into her palms as she struggled to maintain her composure. The room seemed to tilt momentarily as she processed Alexander Chen's words. "I'm Sebastian's son." The statement hung in the air, impossible and yet undeniable given the young man's resemblance to her late husband. Victoria's mind raced through possibilities: an illegitimate child from an affair during his marriage to Catherine, a long-lost relation seeking opportunity after Sebastian's death. Most importantly, how would this affect the inheritance she had calculated so carefully? "I wasn't aware Sebastian had a child," Victoria replied, her voice steady despite her internal turbulence. "He never mentioned you." "He didn't know about me until recently," Alexander explained. "My mother never told him she was pregnant when they parted ways." Robert Keller cleared his throat. "If everyone could please be seated, we can begin the proceedings. All will be explained in due course." Victoria took her place at the conference table, hyper-aware of the curious glances from the other attendees. Richard Harrington was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between anticipation and grim satisfaction. David Chen's face remained professionally neutral, though Victoria noticed he seemed unsurprised by Alexander's presence. "Before we proceed with the formal reading," Keller began, "I've been instructed to play a video message recorded by Sebastian before his passing. He wanted certain matters addressed in his own words." Victoria's uneasiness deepened as Keller activated the large screen on the conference room wall. After a moment, Sebastian's face appeared, not the weakened, frail man of his final days, but Sebastian as he had been perhaps 2 months earlier, composed, clear-eyed, and unmistakably lucid. "If you're watching this," Sebastian began, his voice stronger than Victoria had heard it in weeks, "then I have passed away and you've gathered for the reading of my will. I've asked Robert to play this message first because there are matters that require context before the legal proceedings continue." Sebastian paused, seeming to look directly at Victoria through the screen. "Victoria, my wife, is undoubtedly present and expecting to receive her inheritance as outlined in our prenuptial agreement, 30% of my personal assets. What Victoria doesn't know is that I became aware of her true intentions some months ago." The room fell absolutely silent. Victoria felt her blood turn to ice as Sebastian continued. "For those who don't understand what I'm referring to, let me be clear. Victoria married me with the explicit intention of hastening my death to inherit my fortune. She has been systematically manipulating my medical treatment, tampering with my medications, and creating false symptoms to convince my doctors of a more rapid decline than was actually occurring." Gasps and murmurs erupted around the table. Victoria fought to keep her expression shocked rather than panicked, her mind desperately searching for a defensible position. "This is outrageous," she managed, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "My husband was clearly suffering from paranoid delusions in his final months. His illness affected his mental state." Keller raised a hand. "Please, Mrs. Freeman, allow the message to continue." On screen, Sebastian continued calmly. "I have compiled extensive evidence to support these claims, including toxicology reports, surveillance footage, and documentation of Victoria's communications with her lover, Julian Reed, with whom she planned to enjoy my fortune after my death." Victoria's facade began to crack. Her face paled visibly as Sebastian methodically outlined the evidence against her, the specific medications she had tampered with, dates and times of revealing conversations, even transactions tracking the purchase of substances used to mimic cardiac symptoms. "While I could have pursued criminal charges," Sebastian continued, "I chose a different approach. Victoria targeted me for my wealth, so I determined that justice would be best served by ensuring she never benefits from her actions." Sebastian's expression softened slightly as he turned to a new topic. "I would now like to introduce Alexander Chen, my biological son, whom I only discovered in the final months of my life. DNA testing has conclusively confirmed our relationship. Alexander is not only my son by blood, but has proven himself to be a person of integrity, intelligence, and compassion, qualities that make him the appropriate steward of the Freeman legacy." The video continued for several more minutes as Sebastian explained the restructuring of his estate and his reasons for the decisions he had made. Victoria barely heard the details, her mind frantically calculating her remaining options as her carefully constructed world collapsed around her. When the video finally ended, the room remained silent for several long moments. All eyes turned toward Victoria, whose composed, grieving widow persona had given way to visible distress. "This is slander," she said finally, her voice shaking. Sebastian was not in his right mind. He became paranoid and delusional. Ask Dr. Rothman. He documented Sebastian's mental decline. Dr. Leon Rothman, Keller interjected, has been investigated by the medical board based on evidence that he colluded with you to misdiagnose and improperly medicate Mr. Freeman. The investigation is ongoing, but Dr. Rothman has already surrendered his medical license pending the outcome. Victoria turned to Richard Harrington, seeking some support from Sebastian's oldest friend. "Richard, you knew Sebastian for decades. You saw his decline. You can't possibly believe these paranoid accusations." Richard's expression was coldly unsympathetic. "What I saw, Victoria, was a devoted wife who seemed remarkably focused on her husband's death rather than his recovery. Sebastian confided his suspicions to me months ago. I've been aware of this situation and the evidence from the beginning." The realization that Sebastian had not been fooled, that he had been aware of her manipulations and had methodically constructed his counter-strategy while playing the role of declining husband, struck Victoria with physical force. She had believed herself the director of this performance, only to discover she had been merely an actor in Sebastian's production all along. "Let us proceed with the formal reading," Keller said, opening the official document before him. "The last will and testament of Sebastian James Freeman, being of sound mind and body." What followed was the systematic dismantling of Victoria's future. According to the revised will, Sebastian's personal assets as defined in the prenuptial agreement had been legally restructured. The 30% Victoria was entitled to receive consisted primarily of the Manhattan penthouse, which carried a previously undisclosed mortgage of $14 million, effectively negating its value. Ownership shares in the Freeman Foundation that could not be sold, transferred, or borrowed against, and which generated no income but carried significant tax liabilities. A collection of personal effects and artwork that, while valuable, would incur substantial estate taxes that would exceed their resale value. The bulk of Sebastian's actual fortune, the investment portfolios, real estate holdings, controlling interest in Freeman Innovations, and liquid assets totaling over $700 million, had been transferred before his death into trusts and holding companies controlled by Alexander Chen. "This is impossible," Victoria interrupted. "The prenup clearly states 30% of all personal assets. This restructuring is obviously designed to circumvent that agreement." The prenuptial agreement, Keller explained with professional detachment, specified personal assets as defined at the time of death. Mr. Freeman legally redefined and restructured his assets in compliance with all applicable laws. The courts have consistently upheld an individual's right to arrange their estate as they see fit, provided no laws are broken in doing so. Victoria turned to her personal attorney, Elena Santos, who had been sitting silently throughout the proceedings, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "This can't be legal," Victoria insisted. "We'll contest it immediately." Elena leaned close to speak privately. "Mrs. Freeman, I strongly advise against contesting this will." "Why? It's a blatant attempt to circumvent our prenuptial agreement." Elena hesitated before responding. "Because Mr. Keller has not yet addressed the contingency clause. Perhaps I should allow him to explain." Keller, hearing this exchange, nodded solemnly. "Indeed, the will contains a specific provision regarding contests or challenges. In the event that Mrs. Freeman initiates any legal action to challenge these arrangements, all evidence regarding her actions, including video recordings, text messages, pharmaceutical analyses, and witness statements, will be immediately released to law enforcement authorities and the media." The trap was complete. Victoria could accept the hollow inheritance and walk away with her freedom and reputation intact, if impoverished. Or she could fight and risk not only public humiliation, but potential criminal charges for attempted murder. "This is extortion," Victoria said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is justice," Richard Harrington corrected. "Sebastian gave you a choice. Accept the consequences of your actions privately, or have them exposed publicly. Most criminals don't receive such consideration." Alexander Chen, who had remained largely silent throughout the proceedings, finally spoke. "Mrs. Freeman, for what it's worth, I advocated for including provisions for your basic needs. While my father was focused on ensuring you didn't profit from your actions, I couldn't accept the idea of leaving anyone destitute." Victoria stared at the young man in disbelief. "What provisions?" Keller consulted his documents. "A monthly stipend of $3,000 for a period of 5 years, intended to provide basic living expenses while you re-establish yourself professionally. The stipend is contingent on your acceptance of the will as written and relinquishment of any claims beyond what is specifically granted. $3,000 a month." Victoria had spent more than that on a single dinner. The stipend that Alexander considered compassionate was to Victoria the final humiliation. "I need time to consider my options," she managed to say, gathering the last shreds of her dignity. "Of course," Keller replied. "However, there is one additional matter that requires immediate attention. According to the terms of the mortgage on the penthouse, the loan becomes due in full upon the death of Sebastian Freeman. Unless you can satisfy the $14 million obligation within 30 days, foreclosure proceedings will begin." The meeting concluded with Victoria in a state of shock, unable to fully process the magnitude of what had occurred. As the others filed out of the conference room, Richard Harrington handed her a small USB drive. "Sebastian asked me to give you this privately," he said. "It contains the evidence he compiled, a copy of what will be released if you contest the will. He thought you should see exactly what he knew before making your decision." Victoria accepted the drive with numb fingers. "He outsmarted me completely, didn't he?" she asked quietly. Richard studied her for a moment. "Sebastian always said that in chess, the player who thinks 3 moves ahead will usually win. He was thinking 10 moves ahead while you were still arranging the pieces." That evening, alone in the penthouse that would soon no longer be hers, Victoria connected the USB drive to her laptop. Hours of video footage, hundreds of text messages, detailed medical reports. Sebastian had documented everything with meticulous precision. Most devastating were the recordings from their bedroom, capturing Victoria removing and replacing medications while Sebastian slept. And later, her private phone calls with Julian discussing Sebastian's declining health with barely concealed anticipation. Seeing her actions through Sebastian's eyes, through the eyes of the law, Victoria finally understood the completeness of her defeat. Even if she could find legal grounds to challenge the will, the evidence would ensure not just the loss of any potential inheritance, but her freedom as well. With shaking hands, she reached for her secure phone and called Julian. "It's over," she said when he answered. "Everything. The inheritance, the future we planned. All of it." "What are you talking about?" Julian demanded. "What happened at the reading?" Victoria laughed bitterly. "Sebastian knew everything about us, about what I was doing with his medication. He recorded everything, Julian. Everything." She explained the restructured inheritance, the evidence, the impossible choice she now faced. "There must be a way around this," Julian insisted. "Some legal loophole or—" "There isn't," Victoria interrupted. "If I challenged the will, Sebastian arranged for all the evidence to go public. I could face attempted murder charges." The silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. "So what do you have left?" Julian finally asked, his tone markedly cooler. "A mountain of debt, a $3,000 monthly stipend for 5 years, and a few personal possessions," Victoria replied. "Not exactly the fortune we planned our future around." Another long pause followed. "I see," Julian said finally. "Well, this is unfortunate. Obviously, we need to rethink certain aspects of our arrangement." The shift in his voice told Victoria everything she needed to know. Julian had never loved her, just as she had never loved Sebastian. Their relationship had been transactional, built entirely on the promise of Sebastian's wealth. "Don't bother with the gentle letdown," Victoria said sharply. "We both know you're interested in my bank accounts, not my company. And since those accounts will soon be empty, we have nothing further to discuss." She ended the call before Julian could respond, then poured herself another glass of Sebastian's expensive scotch, one of the few luxuries she could still momentarily enjoy. The following days brought a cascade of harsh realities. Victoria's personal attorney confirmed that contesting the will would be both legally challenging and potentially dangerous, given the evidence Sebastian had compiled. "Even if we could establish grounds for contest, which is doubtful, the contingency clause would activate immediately," Elena explained. "The evidence would become public record, and given its nature, criminal investigation would be inevitable. Victoria's financial advisor delivered equally grim news. Beyond the penthouse's mortgage, Victoria had accumulated substantial personal debt, assuming it would be easily covered by her inheritance. Credit cards, personal loans, and the lavish lifestyle she had maintained as Sebastian's wife had created financial obligations far exceeding the stipend Alexander had granted her. Without liquid assets from the estate, you're effectively insolvent, the advisor concluded. I recommend bankruptcy protection and immediate liquidation of any personal assets not covered by the will's provisions. Most painful was the swift social collapse that followed news of Victoria's reduced circumstances. While the specific details of Sebastian's accusations remained private per the will's terms, the drastic reduction in Victoria's inheritance became common knowledge in their social circle. The invitations that had once filled her calendar dwindled, then stopped entirely. Former friends became suddenly busy when she called. Charity boards that had welcomed her influence politely suggested she might want to focus on personal matters for the time being. Victoria experienced firsthand the conditional nature of acceptance in high society. Without Sebastian's fortune and influence supporting her, she had been effectively excommunicated from the world she had schemed so long to enter. 2 weeks after the will reading, Victoria received an unexpected visitor at the penthouse. Alexander Chen arrived unannounced, his expression serious, but not unkind. "Mrs. Freeman," he greeted her formally when she opened the door. "I apologize for coming without notice, but I wanted to speak with you privately." Victoria hesitated, then gestured him inside. The penthouse was already showing signs of her changing circumstances, empty spaces where artwork had been sold, boxes packed with items for potential liquidation. "I assume you've come to ensure I'm vacating your property promptly," Victoria said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Alexander shook his head. "Actually, I came to discuss your transition. The mortgage deadline is approaching, and I wanted to verify that you have arrangements for new accommodations." Victoria laughed humorlessly. "Are you concerned about my welfare, Mr. Chen? How thoughtful, considering your father engineered my complete ruin." "My father engineered consequences," Alexander corrected gently. "There's a difference." They moved to the living room, where Victoria reluctantly offered him a seat. She had been drinking, not excessively, but enough to dull the constant anxiety that had become her companion. "What do you want from me?" she asked directly. "Haven't you and Sebastian won completely? Is there some additional humiliation I've yet to experience?" Alexander studied her thoughtfully. "I'm not here to humiliate you. I'm here because, despite what you did, I believe in basic human dignity. The stipend was my addition to Sebastian's plan. He wanted to leave you with nothing." Victoria was momentarily silenced by this revelation. "Why would you advocate for me? You don't even know me." "I don't need to know you personally to believe that everyone deserves basic security," Alexander replied. "What you did was wrong, criminal even, but creating another person desperate enough to harm others doesn't improve the world." His compassion, so at odds with what Victoria had come to expect, momentarily disarmed her carefully constructed defenses. "He beat me completely," she said quietly. "I thought I was so clever, so careful, but Sebastian was always 10 steps ahead." Alexander nodded. "He was extraordinary that way. Though if it provides any context, he told me he wouldn't have discovered your plan if not for genuine concern about medication discrepancies. His first instinct was to trust you, to believe he had simply forgotten taking certain pills. It was only when patterns emerged that he began investigating." Victoria absorbed this information, recognizing the irony. Her manipulation of Sebastian's medication, the very tool she had used to try to hasten his death, had ultimately led to her downfall. "Do you have a place to go when you leave here?" Alexander asked, returning to his original purpose. "I'm looking at apartments in Queens," Victoria admitted. "It's an adjustment." Alexander reached into his jacket and produced an envelope. "This isn't in the will, and Sebastian didn't authorize it. It's from me personally. The address of a small but decent apartment in Brooklyn. It's paid for 1 year. After that, you're on your own, but it should give you time to re-establish yourself without immediate housing pressure." Victoria stared at the envelope, unable to comprehend this unexpected act of mercy from the person who had the most right to despise her. "Why would you do this?" "Because it's what I would want someone to do for me if I lost everything," Alexander said simply. And because continuing the cycle of vengeance and suffering doesn't honor my father's legacy as I understand it. He stood to leave, having delivered his message and offer. At the door, he turned back. Sebastian told me something before he died that I've been reflecting on. He said that the greatest tragedy of your relationship wasn't your betrayal, but the fact that you never gave yourself the chance to genuinely love someone who might have loved you in return. He said you were so focused on what his wealth could provide that you missed experiencing what an actual partnership might have been. The words struck Victoria with unexpected force. She had never considered what a genuine relationship with Sebastian might have meant, the connection, support and growth that could have come from an authentic partnership rather than a calculated transaction. He was a remarkable man, she acknowledged quietly. I never allowed myself to see that. After Alexander departed, Victoria opened the envelope and found not only the apartment information, but a brief handwritten note. What happens next is entirely your choice. You can remain trapped in bitterness over losing a fortune you never earned, or you can begin building something authentic with the life you still have. Either way, this is where Sebastian's story in your life ends, and your own story continues. The following morning, Victoria received a formal letter from Freeman Innovations' legal department. The communication was brief, but devastating. Julian Reed had been terminated from his position at Morgan Stanley after evidence of professional impropriety emerged. The letter didn't specify the nature of the evidence, but Victoria had little doubt it came from Sebastian's collection of their communications, strategically deployed. Sebastian's revenge extended beyond the grave, methodically dismantling not just Victoria's financial future, but the relationship she had cultivated as her escape plan. Julian was now as toxic professionally as Victoria was socially, another calculated move in Sebastian's posthumous chess game. That same day, Victoria's attempt to access the safe deposit box where she had stored her most valuable jewelry revealed yet another layer of Sebastian's planning. The account had been frozen pending investigation of potentially fraudulent acquisitions. Specifically, items purchased with funds Sebastian had documented as obtained under false pretenses. By evening, Victoria found herself sitting on the penthouse balcony, watching the sunset over Central Park for one of the last times. In less than 2 weeks, she would need to vacate the property she had once expected to own outright. The jewelry she had accumulated, worth several $1 million, was inaccessible and potentially forfeit. Her social standing had evaporated, her lover had abandoned her, and her financial future had contracted from unlimited abundance to bare subsistence. Yet amid the ruins of her carefully constructed plan, Victoria experienced an unexpected emotion: relief. The constant performance, the calculated manipulation, the vigilant maintenance of her false persona, all had required exhausting, unrelenting effort. For the first time since targeting Sebastian, Victoria could simply be herself, without pretense or performance. The irony wasn't lost on her. Only in complete defeat had she found a kind of liberation. As darkness fell over Manhattan, Victoria opened her laptop one final time to review Sebastian's evidence. Among the surveillance files was a video she hadn't noticed before, labeled simply "Final Message." With trembling fingers, she clicked play. Sebastian's face appeared on screen, recorded shortly before his death, judging by his appearance. Unlike the clinical, evidence-focused recordings she had seen earlier, this Sebastian looked directly into the camera with surprising gentleness. "Victoria," he began, "if you're watching this, then you've seen the evidence and understood the completeness of your defeat. You've likely also realized that I knew about your plan for months before my death, yet said nothing, did nothing to expose you directly." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "You might wonder why I chose this approach rather than criminal prosecution. The answer is simple. I wanted you to experience exactly what you planned for me, the systematic dismantling of everything you valued. Just as you patiently administered your poison to slowly destroy my body, I designed this response to gradually destroy the life you thought you were creating." Sebastian's expression softened slightly. "There was a moment, early in our relationship, when I believed we might build something genuine together. I saw your intelligence, your determination, your capacity for strategic thinking, all qualities I admired. But you chose to direct those gifts toward destruction rather than creation, toward taking rather than building." He leaned closer to the camera. "This is the last you'll hear from me, Victoria. I've arranged for Alexander to offer you basic security, not because you deserve it, but because he insisted, and I respect his judgment. What you do with this second chance is entirely your choice. My justice is complete. My role in your story is finished." Sebastian paused again, his expression thoughtful. "One final observation. The greatest miscalculation in your plan wasn't underestimating my perception. It was assuming that wealth and power were life's most valuable acquisitions. I built a fortune, yes, but I measure my life's success in the relationships I formed, the innovations I created, and the positive impact I had on others. That legacy continues through Alexander and the Foundation, undiminished by your actions or my death." He smiled slightly, the first genuine smile Victoria had seen from him in months. "Goodbye, Victoria. I hope someday you discover that the truly valuable things in life can't be acquired through deception or inherited through death. They must be earned through authentic living." The screen went black, leaving Victoria alone with the uncompromising truth of Sebastian's final words and the uncertain future they heralded. In the quiet aftermath of Sebastian's message, as Manhattan's lights twinkled beyond the penthouse windows, Victoria confronted the completeness of her defeat. Sebastian Freeman, even in death, had orchestrated not just the protection of his fortune, but a form of justice so precisely calibrated to her crimes that it bordered on artistic. The golden cage Victoria had so carefully designed for herself had become her prison, and Sebastian, the man she had underestimated so catastrophically, had simply watched her lock herself inside before quietly walking away with the key. The foreclosure notice arrived exactly 30 days after the reading of Sebastian's will. Victoria had expected it, had prepared herself for this inevitability, yet seeing the official document still sent a wave of nausea through her body. The penthouse, the crown jewel of the life she had constructed, would be reclaimed by the bank in 14 days unless she could produce $14 million. She laughed bitterly at the absurdity of it. 2 years ago, she had been a cocktail waitress counting tips at the end of her shift. 6 months ago, she had been the elegant Mrs. Freeman, respected philanthropist and fixture of Manhattan's social elite. Now she stood somewhere between those identities, neither the struggling service worker nor the wealthy socialite, but something far more precarious. A woman who had glimpsed incredible wealth, only to have it yanked away at the moment of acquisition. Victoria had spent the preceding weeks attempting every possible strategy to salvage something from the wreckage of her plans. Her first approach had been legal, a discreet consultation with a different attorney to explore potential challenges to Sebastian's will. Even ignoring the evidence contingency, the attorney had explained after reviewing her case, the restructuring of assets appears legally sound. Mr. Freeman consulted multiple experts to ensure his arrangements would withstand scrutiny, but the prenuptial agreement clearly stated 30% of his assets, Victoria had insisted. Surely this restructuring violates the spirit of that agreement. The attorney had shaken his head. Courts examine the letter of such agreements, not the spirit. Mr. Freeman adhered precisely to the language, which specified personal assets as defined at time of death. His redefinition of those assets prior to death falls within his legal rights. When legal avenues proved fruitless, Victoria had attempted emotional appeals to those who might influence the situation. She arranged a meeting with Richard Harrington, hoping Sebastian's oldest friend might be persuaded to advocate for more generous terms. "I understand Sebastian's anger," Victoria had told him, modulating her voice to project vulnerable sincerity. "I made terrible mistakes, but surely this complete financial destruction goes beyond justice into cruelty." Richard had studied her with the penetrating gaze of a man who had spent decades evaluating witness testimony as a judge. "What fascinates me," he said finally, "is your continued performance. Even now, when the audience has left and the curtain has fallen, you're still playing a role." He leaned forward. "Sebastian wasn't angry, Victoria. That's what you've never understood about him. He was strategic. This wasn't punishment, it was the logical consequence of your actions, designed with the precision he brought to everything in his life." Victoria had abandoned pretense then, her facade cracking under Richard's unflinching assessment. "So there's no possibility of negotiation? No way to amend the terms?" "None," Richard confirmed. Alexander might have been persuaded to show additional mercy, but Sebastian anticipated that possibility. The trusts and holding companies are structured with multiple oversight requirements specifically to prevent impulsive generosity. Alexander can provide small personal assistance, like the apartment he offered, but cannot alter the fundamental financial arrangements without unanimous approval from the Board of Trustees. When emotional appeals failed, Victoria had resorted to more desperate measures. She attempted to contact Julian Reed, believing his financial resources might offer temporary salvation. Her calls went unanswered, her messages unread. When she finally located him at his apartment building, the doorman informed her that Mr. Reed had left instructions not to allow her entry under any circumstances. Driven by mounting desperation, Victoria had even attempted veiled threats, suggesting to Elena Santos that she might ignore the contingency clause and go public with her own version of events. "Before you do anything rash," Elena had cautioned, "you should know that Sebastian established a dead man's switch. If you make any public accusations about him or attempt to damage his reputation, all evidence will be automatically released to authorities and media outlets, regardless of whether you formally contest the will." "He thought of everything," Victoria had whispered. "Yes," Elena agreed. "He did." The penthouse furniture was sold at a significant loss. Luxury pieces that had cost hundreds of thousands, now liquidated for pennies on the dollar through a high-end consignment shop. Victoria's designer wardrobe followed, then the smaller artwork Sebastian had left her. Each sale provided temporary financial relief, but did nothing to address the fundamental crisis she faced. The mortgage debt on the penthouse was merely the beginning. Credit card companies began calling, then sending formal demand letters. The black Amex card she had used so freely during her marriage had accumulated over $230,000 in charges. Extravagant dinners, designer shopping sprees, spa treatments, and weekend getaways, all premised on the inheritance that would never materialize. Victoria had been forced to dismiss the household staff, the housekeeper, personal chef, and driver who had maintained the infrastructure of her luxurious life. One by one, they had packed their belongings and departed with professional courtesy, but unmistakable judgment in their eyes. These were people who had witnessed her daily performance, who had observed the disconnect between her public devotion to Sebastian and her private indifference. Most painful was the social collapse. Victoria had built her identity around her position in Sebastian's world, cultivating relationships with Manhattan's elite and positioning herself as a philanthropic force through the Freeman Foundation. As news of her financial circumstances spread through whispered conversations and discreet inquiries, those relationships evaporated with stunning speed. Charity board positions were rescinded through carefully worded emails citing restructuring or streamlining. Invitations to galas and benefits mysteriously stopped arriving. Friends who had eagerly accepted her dinner invitations suddenly developed scheduling conflicts that prevented even coffee meetings. The message was clear. Victoria had been accepted because of Sebastian's fortune and influence. Without those assets, she was not merely unwelcome, but actively avoided, a potential embarrassment to be managed rather than appear to be embraced. 1 month after Sebastian's death, Victoria attended a gallery opening, using one of her last connections to secure an invitation. She had dressed carefully in a preserved Chanel dress, applied her makeup with precision, and prepared conversation topics that would demonstrate her continued relevance. The reality was brutal. Conversation stopped abruptly when she approached. Former friends offered brief, uncomfortable greetings before finding reasons to move elsewhere. By the evening's midpoint, Victoria found herself standing alone in a corner, holding a champagne flute while conversations flowed around her like water around a stone. "They're terrified of association," came a voice beside her. Victoria turned to find Margaret Whitman, an elderly socialite known for her acid tongue and disregard for social niceties. Nothing frightens this crowd more than financial collapse. They fear it's contagious. Victoria managed a brittle smile. "I've discovered the conditional nature of Manhattan friendship," Margaret nodded. "Sebastian was well respected, not just for his money, but for his intelligence and integrity. The rumors about your situation have made you radioactive by comparison." "What exactly are they saying?" Victoria asked, morbidly curious about her own social obituary. "That you married him for his money and were disappointed by the inheritance. The crueler versions suggest you hastened his death. Sebastian was too strategic to allow specific details to leak, but the outline is clear enough to destroy you socially. Victoria sipped her champagne, the expensive taste now associated with loss rather than luxury. And what do you think, Margaret? The older woman studied her with shrewd eyes. I think you played a dangerous game and lost to a superior strategist. I was married to a man like Sebastian, brilliant, 3 steps ahead, ruthlessly fair. Men like that don't lose. They merely decide whether winning is worth their effort. It was the most honest conversation Victoria had experienced in months, perhaps years. No pretense, no performance, just the unvarnished assessment of her situation from someone with nothing to gain or lose from the interaction. Is there a way back from this? Victoria asked quietly. Margaret considered the question seriously. Not to where you were. That world operates on trust and reputation, both of which you've lost. But forward, perhaps. New York has a short memory for those who reinvent themselves authentically. She paused. But first you have to stop pretending, to yourself most of all. The contrast between Victoria's collapsing world and Sebastian's expanding legacy grew more pronounced with each passing week. While Victoria sold possessions and dodged creditors, Alexander Chen was implementing Sebastian's philanthropic vision with remarkable efficiency. The Freeman Foundation announced a $100 million initiative to fund cancer research, honoring Sebastian's late first wife, Catherine. Freeman Innovations unveiled a scholarship program for underprivileged students pursuing technology education. A new wing at New York Presbyterian Hospital opened, dedicated to cardiac care and bearing Sebastian's name. Local news outlets ran glowing profiles of Alexander Chen, noting his environmental engineering background and commitment to continuing his father's philanthropic legacy while expanding into sustainable technology. Photos showed Alexander, with Sebastian's distinctive eyes and thoughtful expression, touring foundation projects, meeting with research teams, and speaking at technology conferences. Each announcement was another reminder of what Victoria had lost. Not just wealth, but the opportunity to be part of something meaningful. Sebastian had built more than a fortune. He had created a legacy of positive impact that would outlive him by generations. Victoria had focused so intently on acquiring his money that she had overlooked the true value of what he had created. The irony was inescapable. If she had genuinely partnered with Sebastian rather than plotting against him, Victoria might have shared in that legacy. Instead, she watched from the periphery as Alexander assumed the role she had coveted, but with an authenticity she had never considered important. On the final evening before vacating the penthouse, Victoria stood on the balcony overlooking Central Park. The spring evening was perfect. Warm breeze, clear sky, the park a lush green expanse below. For the last time, she absorbed the view that had represented the pinnacle of her ambition. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her last remaining friend, Melissa. "Moving truck still coming at 9 a.m. tomorrow? Need help with anything?" Victoria replied with confirmation, grateful that at least one person from her past life had maintained contact. Melissa, who had known her before Sebastian, seemed to view Victoria's fall from grace with compassion rather than judgment. The doorbell rang unexpectedly. Victoria wasn't expecting visitors, having said goodbye to the penthouse privately. Perhaps Melissa had decided to stop by after all. Instead, Victoria opened the door to find David Chen, Sebastian's chief financial advisor, holding a small package. "Mrs. Freeman," he greeted her formally, "I apologize for the unannounced visit. I've been instructed to deliver this to you personally before you leave the penthouse." Victoria accepted the package cautiously. More revelations from beyond the grave. David's expression remained professionally neutral. "I wasn't informed of the contents, only that it was to be delivered to you at this specific time." After he departed, Victoria carried the package to the living room, turning it over in her hands. It was small, wrapped in simple brown paper, with her name written in Sebastian's distinctive handwriting. For a moment, she considered throwing it away unopened, refusing this final communication from the man who had orchestrated her downfall. Curiosity prevailed. Inside the wrapping was a small wooden box inlaid with mother-of-pearl, a jewelry box she recognized from Sebastian's personal collection. When she opened it, Victoria found a single item, the emerald and diamond earrings Sebastian had given her on their first anniversary. Beneath the earrings was a handwritten note. "Victoria, these belong to you. Earned, not taken." Whatever else transpired between us, there were moments of genuine connection. Keep these as a reminder that even in deception, truth occasionally emerges. Victoria held the earrings, tears blurring her vision. The gesture was unexpected, a small act of grace amid the calculated justice Sebastian had designed. The earrings would provide temporary financial relief, certainly, but their deeper significance struck Victoria profoundly. Sebastian had acknowledged the complexity of their relationship, recognizing that not everything had been false. In her performance as the devoted wife, Victoria had occasionally forgotten she was acting, had experienced authentic moments of connection with the remarkable man she had married. Sebastian, ever perceptive, had seen those moments for what they were. The realization triggered something in Victoria, that all the legal documents, financial disasters, and social humiliations had not. Genuine remorse. Not for being caught or losing her expected fortune, but for the authentic human connection she had sacrificed on the altar of her ambition. The Brooklyn apartment Alexander had arranged proved surprisingly adequate. Located in a recently gentrified neighborhood, the one-bedroom unit was modest but well-maintained. Nothing like the luxury Victoria had grown accustomed to, but far better than what she could have afforded on her own. Her first weeks there were spent in a fog of adjustment and denial. Victoria alternated between desperate schemes to reclaim some portion of Sebastian's fortune and paralyzing depression at the magnitude of her fall. She refused Melissa's suggestions to look for employment, clinging to the identity of Mrs. Freeman, even as it became increasingly irrelevant. The monthly stipend Alexander had arranged covered basic necessities but little else. Victoria found herself consulting price tags at the grocery store, calculating cost per wear for clothing purchases, and researching public transportation routes, ordinary considerations for most New Yorkers, but profound shocks to her system after years of unlimited spending. 6 weeks after moving to Brooklyn, Victoria received an unexpected email from Rachel Woods, Sebastian's former assistant, Mrs. Freeman. While organizing Mr. Freeman's personal files, I discovered several applications you submitted to graduate programs before your marriage. Your academic background in art history and museum studies seemed significant. The Freeman Foundation is establishing a new educational initiative at the Metropolitan Museum, and they're seeking administrative support staff with relevant knowledge. This isn't charity or pity. The foundation needs qualified people, and your background appears suitable. If you're interested, you can submit an updated resume to the address below. Respectfully, Rachel Woods. Victoria stared at the email for a long time, conflicting emotions battling for dominance. Pride urged her to delete it immediately. The suggestion that she, once mistress of a financial empire, should apply for an administrative position was insulting. Yet practical necessity argued otherwise. The stipend wouldn't last forever, and Victoria had no other prospects. More complex was her response to the unexpected kindness. Rachel had every reason to despise her, yet had extended a professional lifeline. After 3 days of internal debate, Victoria updated her resume, focusing on her genuine educational background and brief pre-Sebastian experience at a small gallery. She submitted the application with low expectations. Surely Alexander would veto any involvement from the woman who had tried to murder his father. To her surprise, Victoria received an interview request the following week. The position was indeed entry-level, administrative coordination for an educational program bringing art history to underserved schools. The salary was modest, but sufficient when combined with her stipend. The interview itself was a humbling experience. Victoria, once accustomed to commanding rooms and making demands, found herself grateful for basic professional courtesy from the foundation staff. No one mentioned Sebastian or their knowledge of her past. She was evaluated solely on her qualifications and apparent commitment to the role. 2 days later, Victoria received a job offer. The position would begin in 3 weeks, providing administrative support to the education initiative, while requiring minimal public interaction, a careful arrangement that acknowledged her skills while protecting the foundation's reputation. That evening, Victoria called Melissa to share the unexpected development. "It has to be Alexander," she said after explaining the situation. "Rachel wouldn't have acted without his approval, but why would he help me this way, after everything I did?" "Maybe he meant what he said about human dignity," Melissa suggested, "or maybe he recognizes that perpetual punishment doesn't serve any purpose." "Sebastian would never have approved," Victoria mused. "Wouldn't he? From what you've told me, Sebastian was calculating but fair. Perhaps this is exactly the outcome he would have wanted." You building something legitimate rather than taking from others. The perspective shift was disorienting. Victoria had viewed Sebastian's posthumous actions as pure revenge, yet the evidence suggested otherwise. He had ensured she couldn't profit from her deception, but had left open the possibility of an honest life. Alexander and Rachel, presumably acting in accordance with Sebastian's values, if not his explicit instructions, were offering a path toward legitimate rebuilding. For the first time since Sebastian's death, Victoria allowed herself to consider a future based on earned achievement rather than calculated acquisition. Over the following months, Victoria gradually established a new routine. Her work at the foundation provided structure and purpose, though it remained strange to be an employee of the organization she had once expected to control. She lived modestly, slowly adjusting to financial limitations that once would have seemed intolerable. The social adaptation proved more challenging. Victoria's former friends remained distant, her invitations to Manhattan events non-existent. She found herself building connections in Brooklyn instead, relationships based on proximity and shared experiences rather than wealth or influence. These new acquaintances knew nothing of her past as Mrs. Freeman, judging her solely on present behavior rather than former status. Victoria sold Sebastian's anniversary earrings to pay off the most pressing credit card debt, finding unexpected relief in beginning to address her financial obligations honestly. The remaining debts were consolidated through bankruptcy proceedings, another humbling experience, but one that provided a framework for eventual recovery. 9 months after Sebastian's death, Victoria attended the opening of the Freeman Foundation's new educational wing at the Metropolitan Museum, not as an honored guest or donor, but as a staff member managing logistical details from the background. She watched Alexander deliver a speech about accessibility in arts education, noting how his quiet confidence echoed Sebastian's without mimicking it. After the formal ceremonies, Alexander approached her directly, their first interaction since he had offered her the Brooklyn apartment. "How are you finding the position, Mrs. Freeman?" he asked, his tone professional but not unkind. "It's Victoria, please," she replied. "Mrs. Freeman doesn't really exist anymore." She paused, considering her answer carefully. "The work is meaningful, more meaningful than anything I did as Sebastian's wife, if I'm being honest." Alexander nodded. "The education director speaks highly of your organizational skills and art history knowledge. I'm glad you found a way to use your genuine talents." The simple acknowledgement of her legitimate abilities affected Victoria deeply. For so long, her only recognized skill had been manipulation, the calculated performance that had secured Sebastian's affection and access to his world. The recognition of actual capability, however modest, represented something she had rarely experienced: earned respect. "Why did you approve my hiring?" Victoria asked directly. "You had every reason to ensure I never came near the foundation again." Alexander considered the question thoughtfully. "Before he died, my father told me something that stayed with me. He said true justice isn't about punishment, but about restoration, creating the conditions for better choices, rather than perpetual payment for past ones." "That doesn't sound like the Sebastian I knew," Victoria admitted. "Perhaps you knew only the parts of him you chose to see," Alexander suggested gently. "The man I came to know in those final months was complex, strategic and boundary-setting certainly, but also deeply thoughtful about the purpose of consequence." As Alexander moved on to greet other guests, Victoria remained in place, absorbing this perspective on the man she had married yet never truly known. She had approached Sebastian as a target and an obstacle, first something to acquire, then something to remove. She had never considered him as a complete human being with depths beyond her immediate objectives. The realization was profoundly uncomfortable, yet strangely liberating. Victoria had spent months trapped in bitter resentment, viewing herself as the victim of Sebastian's posthumous revenge. The possibility that his actions had been calibrated for justice rather than vengeance, that they contained the seeds of potential redemption, offered a different narrative for her future. 1 year after Sebastian's death, Victoria visited his grave for the first time. The private cemetery plot overlooked the Hudson River, a peaceful setting where Sebastian had been laid to rest beside Catherine, his first wife. Victoria brought no flowers or sentimental offerings, only the honesty she had withheld throughout their marriage. "You won," she said simply, standing before the elegant headstone. "Completely and thoroughly. You dismantled everything I thought I wanted." The spring breeze rustled the trees overhead, the only response to her words. "But I'm beginning to think that wasn't your only objective," Victoria continued. "The way you structured everything, ensuring I lost your fortune while leaving open the possibility of building something legitimate. It wasn't just punishment, it was recalibration." Victoria sat on a nearby bench, gathering her thoughts. "Alexander and Rachel offered me a path when they had no reason to do so. They say they're acting in accordance with your values. I never bothered to understand those values when you were alive. I was too focused on what you could give me to consider what you might teach me." The irony wasn't lost on Victoria, having this authentic conversation only after Sebastian could no longer hear it. Yet something about speaking these truths aloud felt necessary for her continued evolution. "I don't expect forgiveness," she concluded. "I don't even know if I'm sorry for wanting what you had, just for how I tried to get it. But I am building something different now, something earned. Perhaps that's what you intended all along." As Victoria prepared to leave, she noticed another visitor approaching from the cemetery entrance, Alexander, carrying a simple bouquet. They acknowledged each other with respectful nods, Victoria departing as Alexander arrived, each allowing the other private time with the complicated man who had transformed both their lives. Walking back toward the cemetery gates, Victoria felt a weight lift slightly. Sebastian had indeed crafted her punishment with precision, ensuring she experienced exactly the loss she had planned for him. But within that justice, he had embedded the possibility of reconstruction, not a return to illusory wealth, but the opportunity to build an authentic life beyond the golden cage she had designed for herself. For the first time since Sebastian's death, Victoria faced her future not with resentment for what had been taken, but curiosity about what might yet be built. It was not the future she had planned, but it was perhaps the future she had earned. If this story touched your heart, and you want to keep following inspiring and moving stories, be sure to check out our upcoming videos, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications to stay updated on new content that can brighten your journey and provide valuable insights. Join us and keep exploring stories that truly matter. I'm sure the next video that pops up on your screen will touch you as well, so click on it now, and we'll see you there.